The Governess by Evelyn Harvey, dramatised by Barry Campbell and Michael Bakewell, with Angela Pleasance and James Bolam.
My mouse! I want my mouse!
Come now, Pelham, no need to cry, you silly boy. I'll go downstairs to the drawing room and fetch you another.
But Mamma will be angry and...
You earned that mouse with your recitation. Your mamma will give you another, I am sure.
But won't Grandpapa be cross if you go down now?
You go and see if Mary has brought up the water for your bath. Little boys shouldn't speculate about their elders and betters, you know that. Now off you go.
Yes,
Quickly
Miss
now.
Unwin.
Well, Miss Unwin?
If you please, Mrs. Thackerton, I should like another sugar mouse for Pelham.
Another mouse? Surely he should not be given two in one evening.
Oh, no, of course he should not. But the one you gave him has disappeared from the table on the landing outside the schoolroom while he was eating his supper.
But why was the mouse outside on the landing?
You will remember, madam, that if Master Pelham was allowed to eat the whole mouse, which he had earned as a reward for his recitation, he did not finish his bread and milk, so that we agreed he should take only one piece until...
Ah, and the boy munches off the mouse's head in one good bite, eh? Eh?
Yes, sir.
He'll do. That boy will do when he takes his place as head of the firm, eh, Arthur?
Yes, Father.
He won't let anyone put anything past him, not my grandson, not my little muncher, eh?
Yes, but why was the mouse left outside the schoolroom?
Oh, that is quite simple, madam. I found that just looking at his treats stopped Pelham from eating up his supper. So he and I agreed that it should be left outside until he had finished.
And now the mouse has been taken away?
I have only just found that the mouse has gone, sir. Of course, I shall make inquiries, but poor Pelham is much distressed.
Give the boy another mouse, quick as you like.
Yes, sir. Good night, sir, madam. No, Pelham, no tears. You must learn to bear disappointment, you know. Now, show me how brave and sensible you can be, and tomorrow I will try and find out what happened to your mouse tonight, and see it does not happen again.
Yes, Miss Unwin, I will be good, and tomorrow you'll catch that beastly thief, and then Grandfather will be very angry.
Well, we'll see about that when it happens. In the morning at prayers, I shall look very carefully at every member of the household to see if I can detect which of them it is. Now, shall we play snakes and ladders?
O God, who art the author of peace and the lover of concord, in knowledge of whom standeth our
One
eternal
thing
life,
is certain.
whose
The
service
thief
is
must come from inside the
Defend
house.
us, thy humble servants,
All the doors and
all
windows are
sorts of our
bolted as if
enemies,
the place were a prison,
that we surely
and only
trust
Mr.
in thy
Thackerton and
defence.
Mr. Arthur have
May not
latch
fear
keys.
hard any
But it
adversaries,
couldn't possibly be
but
one
the
of the
might
family.
Jesus Christ
They wouldn't
our
steal
Lord.
a sugar
Amen.
mouse.
Amen.
Amen.
O Lord,
So it
our
must
heavenly
be one of the
Father,
servants.
almighty and
But
everlasting
which?
God,
The only one I really know is Wilkins, and it couldn't be her.
defend us
We
in
were
the same
orphans
with thy
together.
mighty power.
None of the others
And
trust
from
me.
this day we fall
But they say
into
it's
no
always like
sin,
that on your first job
neither
as
run into
governess.
any kind of danger.
They know that I'm
But
really
all
not
our
much better
doings
than
may
they
be
are.
ordered by thy government,
Is it Harriet
to do always
or
what is
Nancy?
righteous in thy sight.
Why would
Through Jesus
either of them do a
Christ
thing
our
like
Lord.
that?
Amen.
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 O Lord,
And I
our
can't see
heavenly
Mrs.
Father,
Breakspeare creeping
I
up from her
mighty
kitchen
King
to
of
steal a
kings,
mouse.
the only ruler
But
of
what
princes,
about old Mr.
who
Thackerton's
doth from thy
maid?
throne
What's her name?
behold all that
Simmons.
dwelleth on earth.
She's got
Most
mean
heartily
little eyes and
beseech
never
thee
makes
with
a
thy favour,
sound.
to behold our most gracious
Certainly not
sovereign
Mr.
lady,
Mellings.
Victoria,
He wouldn't
and
demean
so
himself to do a
replenish
thing
her
like
with the grace
that.
of the Holy Spirit,
Nor would Mr.
that she may
Thackerton's
always
valet.
incline to thy will and walk in
And
thy
then
way.
there's the footman.
Endue her plenteously
Either
with heavenly gifts.
Harry or
Grant
Joseph
her
might be
in
the
health and
thief.
wealth long to live.
Or what about John?
Strengthen her that she may vanquish and overcome
He always
all
looks
her enemies.
enviously at the dishes of
And finally,
sweets when they're
after
carried
this
into
life,
the dining
she may
room.
attain everlasting joy
It could
and
very well be him.
Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
The grace of our Lord
Well,
Jesus
tonight
Christ
I'll set a trap,
and the fellowship
and
of
we'll
the Holy
soon
Ghost
find out who the thief
be with
is.
us all evermore. Amen.
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 Miss, Miss, have you set the trap?
Shh, eat up your supper like a good boy.
But I
If
don't...
they hear you, they will run away.
Is it one of the maids or cook or Mullen?
Shh, we don't want any long ears to hear our plan, do we? Very well. Now, we will tie this thread to the mouse's tail.
Mice's?
Mouse's tail. And put it on the table. Then we tie a bow of paper to this end. So...
It's like a butterfly.
Yes, and if the thief takes the mouse, the butterfly will flutter and tell us, so that we may catch whoever it is in the act.
Yes, and Grandfather will punish them.
Now, eat up your supper, and then you may stay up a little later tonight and help me watch the butterfly.
And spring the trap.
Yes. It's time you were in bed.
But the butterfly hasn't moved.
No, our trap has not worked.
Then may I have the mouse before I go to bed?
It's not really... Oh, very well. We'll fetch it.
It's gone!
Oh, no, they've cut off its tail. Oh, dear. What shall I do? This is ridiculous. If this goes on, I could lose my place. And all because of a silly stolen sugar mouse. Well, Pelham, the thief has beaten us again. But we are not going to be beaten, do you hear?
No, we're not. We're jolly well not.
Tomorrow we will set another trap. A better one. Oh, we shall catch the thief all right.
And then we'll roast him. Roast him.
There. What do you think of that?
That's a fine mouse.
A very fine mouse indeed. A plaster mouse.
Full of toffee.
And dusted with sugar. Oh, yes, a very fine mouse. And one that should do the trick and catch the thief.
Yes, Mr. Thief. Just you jolly well wait.
Oh! 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 My teeth! My teeth! Oh!
The boy is asleep. Well, Joseph, you're caught red-handed. How could you have played such a nasty trick on Master Pelham night after night?
You could always have fetched the boy a new one, couldn't you? You got him on soon enough the first time. I was watching you. But you didn't dare face him again in the drawing room, did you?
I had hoped that this was something that could be settled here and now. But if you take this attitude, I shall have to tell Mrs. Arthur what you have done.
Don't do that, miss. I might be dismissed. Please, miss.
Very well. You will say no more about it.
Thank you, miss. Thank you.
Well, that is that. Thank goodness.
No. Joseph?
Yes, Vilkins. You should have seen him.
Oh, he's a sly one, that Joseph. But what are you going to do?
Nothing this time. He's had his warning, but if it happens again, it will have to be reported. I can't have him putting me down. I fought very hard to become a governess, my dear. It means a lot to me.
Yeah.
If I let him triumph over me and let things slip, I could soon be back in the workhouse. And that is something I am not going to let happen.
You're still the same determined little Unwin who stood side by side with me in front of the parish beadle. He was a stickler for the alphabet. You came after that little lad who ran away. Now, what was his name?
Twist.
Twist? Yeah, that's it. So you were Unwin, and I was next, so I had to be Vilkins.
Spelling wasn't one of his strong points. Well, Vilkins, my dear, let us hope that Joseph has learnt his lesson.
My nose is gone. Oh, Miss Unwin.
Well, Miss Unwin,
You will remember, Mrs. Thackerton, that not long ago I had to ask you for another sugar mouse for Pelham when the one you had given him mysteriously disappeared.
sugar mice. Do you want another one? Has the same thing happened again? Well, why did you not just take one instead of dragging me away from my guests?
Yes, madam, the same thing has happened. A good many times since the first incident. And I have discovered the thief. It is Joseph.
Joseph? Oh, the footman. Well, if you found him out, all well and good, but I do not see why I should be bothered over it.
I had hoped that catching Joseph in the act would be enough to bring the business to a halt, but this evening he has taken yet another mouse. Shall I tell Mellings that Joseph is to come and see you in the morning?
Yes. No.
Oh, Miss Unwin, I really cannot have all this nonsense put upon me. I'm sure Joseph is not half as much to blame as you seem to think. Now come and fetch poor little Pelham another sugar mouse. I cannot understand why you've left him waiting so long, poor lamb.
Far better they should sleep a while within the church's shade, nor wake until new heaven, new earth meet for their eternal birth.
Enough, thank you, my dear.
Yes, Mrs. Thackerton.
Tell me, Miss Unwin, what is this I hear about my grandson, poor little Pelham, that you have made him go without his treat for so many nights?
Ah, so you have heard about the sugar mice? Well, poor Pelham must learn to accept the setbacks of life.
If only I had been as firm as that with Arthur. We had no governess for him, you know. Mr. Thackerton was not so prosperous in those days. It was before he was able to use the invention for making our famous steam-moulded hats. Yes, Arthur was always a troublesome boy.
Mrs. Thackerton, I had occasion to tell Mrs. Arthur that Joseph has been stealing Master Pelham's treats.
Joseph?
Yes, he was caught red-handed. But I am very much afraid that she does not intend to take the matter up with him. Do you think you could see him?
See him? You mean speak to him? Dismiss Joseph myself? No. No, my dear girl, you are asking too much. You know that the affairs of the house are out of my keeping.
Yes, I can see that such a task is beyond you, Mrs. Thackerton. And since Mrs. Arthur will not take it up, there is only one thing I can do. I shall have to speak to Mr. Thackerton myself.
You must do what you think best, my dear.
Come in. Well, Miss Unwin?
I am sorry to trouble you at this hour, sir, but there is a certain matter which I think it my duty to bring to your attention.
Indeed. And what is this certain matter?
It is a matter concerning one of the servants, sir.
The servants? Mrs. Arthur will deal with it.
I am sorry to say, Mr. Thackerton, that I have already brought the matter to Mrs. Arthur's notice, but she has not pursued it.
Pray, what is this matter that you seem to consider so serious?
I am sure you will agree, sir, that theft, even of trifling objects, is a serious matter, especially when it is repeated more than once.
One of the servants is stealing. Who is it, man or woman? Neither shall remain a day longer under this roof.
It is Joseph, sir. He has been stealing Master Pelham's treats.
Joseph? Well, Well, Miss Unwin, I must say I have not heard anything to Joseph's detriment before this.
There may have been nothing to hear, but I can assure you, sir, that he has been responsible for stealing Master Pelham's sweets night after night.
Will Pelham verify this?
Yes, sir. We caught Joseph red-handed. But let me say that I do not think he ought to be questioned about the matter. It might disturb him further.
I dare say. So, we shall have to take your word for it, then. Very well. I shall speak to Joseph tomorrow and take whatever steps I think necessary. And now, good night, Miss Unwin.
Good night, sir.
Has Grandpapa roasted Joseph yet, do you think?
I expect so, Master Pelham.
He stole my treats. We caught him.
So we did.
We were very clever. All the same, Joseph is still here. I saw him. He laughed at me. If Grandpapa roasted him for stealing my treats, why is he still here? And why did he laugh at me?
I should be most interested to know the answer to that question myself. Most interested. In fact, I shall ask Joseph myself.
When will you do that?
When I can be certain of finding him alone. It is Henry's night off, so it will be Joseph who takes Mr. Thackerton his nightcap of whisky. We shall be late tonight because Mr. Brattle from the factory is staying here, and I expect Mr. Thackerton will wish to have a word with him. But as soon as he is gone and Joseph has taken in the whisky, I shall place myself outside the door and corner him.
Yes, corner him and roast him. He stole my mice. He is horrid, horrid.
Joseph, I want a word with you, Joseph. Joseph, what is it? You're as white as a sheet.
The master, miss.
What of him?
He's dead, miss. Stabbed. He's murdered.
Joseph, tell me, what did Mr. Thackerton say to you when you saw him this morning?
This morning, miss? Oh, master just gave me a good wigging, that's all.
Stabbed? Did you say Mr. Thackerton had been stabbed?
Stabbed, miss. With one of the library paper knives.
Wait here while I look. Blood is still wet, freshly scarlet. Oh, my God, no. Joseph! Joseph! Rouse the house! The master has not long been dead. Quickly, find Mr. Arthur! Quickly!
Miss Unwin, what is this? Joseph is blubbering and mouthing something about my father. Is he ill? What's the matter? Do you know anything about it?
Yes, sir, I do. I am sorry to have to tell you that your father is dead. He has been killed.
Killed? What nonsense, woman. Come with me into the library. Then we shall see whether... Good God. Good God. Who's done this? The windows.
No, sir. No one could have got in that way or got out. The windows are too high. It is possible, sir, I think, that whoever did this is still in the house. It is hardly possible for anyone to have escaped as soon as this. The downstairs windows are barred and the doors are kept locked.
What are you saying, you foolish woman? You are asserting that someone within the house is responsible for this terrible crime. I order you to silence.
I will go now, sir. I must see that Pelham is not disturbed.
You do well to remember your charge. I will send Joseph for the police immediately.
Drood's the name, sir. Sergeant Drood, Scotland Yard. Now, sir, I've had an account of the bare bones of this business from your man, Joseph, as we drove here from Scotland Yard, and I have made an examination of the cadaver. So I propose here and now to put a few questions up and down to whoever I choose to ask them of.
Is this really necessary? After all...
Ah, I see you are offended, sir. But I make no bones about offending you, standing at the head of your own table though you may be. A murder has been committed, Mr. Arthur Thackerton, and I am here to see that its perpetrator is brought to justice. Now, there are two ways I might go about this business, sir. I could go about it in your way, or I could go about it in mine. If I go about it in your way, I should question each member of the household in turn, starting with your good self and working my way down. And what should I discover by this process? I will tell you. Nothing whatsoever. Each one of those here present, from top to bottom, would tell me what he or she thought he or she ought to tell me. That and no more. But, sir, if I proceed in my own manner, asking my questions here and there as the fit takes me, well, how do you think I should get along then?
I suppose you would get along all the better, Sergeant.
That's it, sir. That's the ticket. I should get along very, very much better.
Carry on then, Sergeant. You know best.
Thank you, sir. Now then, where to start? You!
Me, sir?
Yes, you. You've got a guilty, sneaking look about you, boy.
No, sir.
No, sir. Now, sir, did you open any of the doors in this house last night, sir? Last night, sir?
Doors, sir?
When
No,
none
not
of
me,
your
sir.
lies, sir, is the least bit of good with me, sir. Come on now, young fellow, my lad, out with it. Did you let someone into this house?
No.
Well, sir, we are waiting, sir.
John, stop that noise. Stop it at once. Now, John, just tell the sergeant the truth. There's nothing to be afraid of. Just tell the simple truth.
Yes, it's time for the truth now. And the truth is here, staring every one of us in the face. Oh, yes, the truth here and now. The truth in blood.
Blood?
Yes, blood. Here, on the sleeve of this dress, blood.
My sleeve? Oh!
Behold the woman of blood here before us.
Yes, Sergeant. No doubt there is blood on my sleeve. It must have been that the sleeve of my dress brushed against... Against the body. There is nothing more sinister in the stain than that.
That may be so, or it may not. Without evidence, who is to tell? And that's what's lacking in this affair. Evidence. Was there any other person in the library with you? There was not. I have got the evidence of Joseph Green, footman. You were in the library entirely on your own, were you not?
Yes, I do not deny it. But, Sergeant, that was after Mr. Thackerton had been stabbed. You know that.
Do I know it? You ask me if I know a certain fact, and I reply, I know what I have evidence for, and I know nothing more.
But you have Joseph's evidence. He went into the library and saw Mr. Thackerton lying there. It was only when he came out that I went in.
Yes, miss. The man Joseph went into the library and saw his master there. But did he see him dead? I took particular care to question him upon just that point as we made our way here in the hansom cab. And what was his answer?
His answer can only have been that he did see his master dead. He came out of the library and he told me that Mr. Thackerton had been stabbed. He said he had been murdered.
Did he indeed? And I suppose that you have witnesses for that assertion?
You know very well that apart from Joseph, no one else was there.
Yes, indeed, I do know that. I know it very well. And I know, too, that Joseph said nothing to me about stabbed and murdered. Nothing at all, did he say?
Joseph, tell the sergeant exactly what you said to me outside the library door.
Outside the library door, miss?
Yes, you know very well where I mean. And when. Tell the sergeant, tell us all, exactly what it is that you said to me.
Well, I'm not sure as how I can recollect exactly, miss.
Come. Did you or did you not say to me, the master's dead, miss? Stabbed?
I will say no more than what I said in the cab, Sergeant. No more and no less, so help me. And that is this. I cannot recollect seeing any paper knife, nor any dagger, in the body of my master when I entered the library of this, his house, in order to take him his nightcap.
Well, Sergeant, there's your plain statement, unaffected by anything I might have said to influence it. You have heard it said that no one saw Mr. Thackerton dead before I entered the library. You yourself pointed to the bloodstain here on my sleeve. Are you going to arrest me for murder, Sergeant?
No, miss. I have no intention whatsoever of arresting you.
She's going to faint. Catch her, one of you, quickly.
Oh, Unwin.
It's all right, Bilkins. I feel better now. But tell me, did the sergeant say anything after I had fainted as to why he did not arrest me?
He said that there were 3 of them.
3 of what?
Mean. That was one of them. No, not mean. Means. That was one.
Means? Did the sergeant say that I had had the means to commit murder?
Yes, them were his very words. Almost.
The means to commit the crime. That must be that the paper knife was so conveniently to hand, so means and opportunity.
Yeah, that's it. That's another.
Opportunity. There was no one else present, or so the sergeant believes, or chooses to believe, and so on to motive. Am I right?
Yeah, that's what he told Mr. Arthur and all of us. You ain't got no motive, so he ain't going to arrest you.
Well, I hope the sergeant never succeeds in finding me a motive for having done that horrible thing. Yet I cannot believe that he will not find something sooner or later. I very much suspect that Sergeant Drood is the sort of person who must have success, cost what it may.
He's got that look. Well, there's only one thing for it, only one thing to be done, and you're the one to do it, Unwin. You're the one that solved the mystery of the sugar mice, and you're the one what's got to solve the mystery of the dead master. You've got to do it to save your own skin, Unwin.
But deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Before you all disperse, I have to announce that there will be certain changes in the household routine today. Mr. Mellish will inform you as to your individual duties. I am naturally much concerned that the terrible event of last night should be referred to as little as possible outside the household.
Yes, sir.
Happily, my late father was well acquainted with the coroner, who has been most helpful. The time of the inquest has been fixed for 3 p.m. today. It will be held here in the house.
Well, well. Murder by a person or persons unknown. Are you surprised, miss?
I beg your pardon? Oh, I'm sorry. Have the servants forgotten you? I'm afraid they are not as they should be after the sad event that has taken place.
You are Miss Unwin, the governess, I take it?
I am. But who are you?
Hopkinson. Hopkinson of the Mercury.
A newspaper reporter? I see. And were you let into the house by one of the servants? Yes or no, sir?
Oh, no need for the peremptory. No need at all. If not welcome, ready at once to retire from the scene.
Then, sir, I suggest you leave at once.
Yes, of course. Tell me,
At
were
once,
you ever...
sir. Joseph,
Yes, miss.
kindly show this gentleman the door.
Certainly, miss. This way, sir.
Did you require something in particular, Miss Unwin?
I came to ask if there is anything you wish me to do, Mrs. Thackerton.
Do? Do? Why should any of us do anything when the new head of the house cannot stay within doors but must go to that person? Why should I care about my duties? Does he?
Perhaps Mrs. Thackerton Senior will find me useful.
Yes, go and read to her, or something. Leave me in peace.
Yes, Mrs. Thackerton. But must go to that person? Which person? A mistress, perhaps? Mr. Arthur with a mistress? I wonder if his father knew. And where did he get the money to... I wonder...
Jack and Jill live in a horse.
House, Pelham. Jack and Jill live in a house. With?
A red door.
Very good.
Come in. You're wanted in the morning room, Miss. Mrs. Arthur, Mrs. Thackerton, as it says, immediate.
Very well, Hannah. Will you sit here with Master Pelham? I dare say I will be back directly.
Oh, I don't know as I can stay, miss. I've got my work to do.
Well, that will have to wait for a little. Master Pelham is not to be left on his own, today of all days.
Yes, miss.
Now be a good boy, Pelham, and try to go on reading the story to yourself. I shan't be long.
Ah, Miss Unwin, at last.
You wanted to see me, Mrs. Arthur?
I wanted you to see this. This newspaper, this disgraceful newspaper.
I'm afraid I do not understand.
No more do I. I do not understand how you could have acted in such a shameful way. Read it. Read it.
Mysterious death of respected hat manufacturer. A murder without a motive by Horatio Hopkinson. Oh, the murder was committed between the hours of 10 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. During this period, only one person is known to have entered the fatal chamber, the governess resident at 3 Northumberland Gardens. In an exclusive interview with Miss Unwin.
In an exclusive interview with Miss Unwin.
Mrs. Thackerton, believe me, that man had no interview with me.
That is not my information. You were seen talking with the individual.
Madam, it is true that I did talk to this man. I came upon him in the hall after the inquest. But who has said I talked with him? Let them face me.
It was Joseph. I cannot see that it is in any way material. Who it was did his duty and informed me.
But if you would just let me explain...
No explanations will meet the case. I've made up my mind.
Believe me,
No, Miss Unwin. We cannot any longer tolerate under our roof, looking after the well-being of our child, a person who is spoken of in the newspapers in this manner. I do not know whether what the paper alleges about you is true. I presume there must be some doubt, since Sergeant Drood has not seen fit to proceed further. But it's intolerable to find ourselves publicly described as sheltering a person who may have committed that crime.
Madam, you are not sheltering that person.
Miss Unwin, I must be the judge of what is or is not suitable. You will go to your room, pack your belongings, and leave this house today, before the funeral procession sets out.
Mrs. Arthur,
Mrs. Thackerton, I cannot accept your decision. It is true that Sergeant Drood appears to entertain suspicions of me, and I suppose that this newspaper repeats the vile suspicions he seemed to hold against me. But I am not guilty of that monstrous crime, any more than I am guilty of having spoken to this reporter, Hopkinson, and I require you to show your belief in that. You must keep me under your roof, or face whatever consequences will come of turning me away and implying utterly unjustly that I have committed the gravest of all offences.
Very well, Miss Unwin, since you put the matter in that light, perhaps, for the time being, we should say no more about it.
You rang, miss?
Yes, Mary, dear. This ought to have been your day off, ought it not?
Oh, yes, but Cook said as I'd better stay in on account of the funeral and everything.
Of course. But is there anything to prevent you going out this evening?
No, she said that would be all right. I was thinking of taking a bit of an airing.
Would you do something for me instead? Oh, but it's not fair to ask.
Oh, well, if you don't ask, I can hardly say as I will, can I? Oh, it's all right, Unwin. Whatever you ask, I'll do it.
Well, it's this. When Mr. Arthur goes out tonight, I want you to follow him.
What? Follow Mr. Arthur? Whatever for, Unwin?
It's hard to explain exactly. It was something Mrs. Arthur said just after the inquest. She said, "Why should any of us do anything when the head of the house cannot stay within doors but must go to that person?" Mary, it's my belief that Mr. Arthur Thackerton has a mistress, and that his wife knows about it. Now, if I can get hold of some definite proof of this, it might help to clear my name.
But how?
Perhaps I am clutching at straws, but somebody in this house killed old Mr. Thackerton, and I know it wasn't me.
Nor me.
Oh, of course not, my dear. But the more information I can get...
And so when Mr. Arthur goes out tonight, you want me to follow him?
Please. Of course. It may be a wild goose chase, but...
Suppose he takes a cab.
Then you must follow him in a cab. Here, take this money.
Oh, God. Follow Mr. Arthur. What a lark. Oh, a handsome cab. Me in it. Oh...
Oh, Mrs. Breakspear, has Mary Wilkins returned yet?
No, she hasn't. Not a sign of her, miss. These young girls not a thought in their heads, but men and having a good time.
Yes, quite.
Did you want a particular, miss?
No, it doesn't matter. Thank you.
Well, if she's a minute after 10:30, she'll get the rough side of my tongue, I can tell you. These young flibberty-gibbets are all the same.
Me, Wilkins.
Why are you so late? Did you find out anything? Tell me.
Oh, well, I found out the lot. Everything. Lock, stock, blooming barrel. You were right, Unwin.
What, Wilkins? What?
Oh, Mr. Arthur goes to a house in Maida Vale, and he meets a lady there. Lady, did I say? Woman, I ought to have said. Miss Bond, she calls herself. Miss Rhoda Bond. I bet she was christened something a sight different. Shrimp girl she was once, so I heard.
This person, this Miss Bond, does Mr. Arthur keep her?
Him now, and one or two more before, so I heard at the pub on the corner. Well, what I didn't hear about Miss Bond, they wouldn't be worth hearing. She owes money, owes high, low, grocer, the butcher, fishmonger, and more besides. And if she goes on that way just a week or two longer, she's going to have the bailiffs in, that's what.
So it's just as I thought. Mr. Arthur does need money, a great deal of money by the sound of it. She must have been pressing him for it, threatening to tell old Mr. Thackerton, perhaps. If only I could be sure of that, I could go to Sergeant Drood and tell him. I must go as soon as possible and talk woman to woman with that creature. There is no hope for me unless I do.
Pelham, I told you to get your cap. Put those marbles away.
Yes, Miss Unwin.
Quickly now, I'm waiting. I told you before, we do not take marbles to the park.
No, Miss Unwin.
Here he is. Has any of them said anything to you about the paper?
No. What paper, Mary?
This paper, and there's something in it about you, so they say. A letter.
A letter about me in the Times? Whatever can...
I pinched it out of the library so you could read it in the park. Leave it on the area steps when you come back, and I'll iron it, and then I'll put it back in the library. Here, quick, take it.
Thank you.
I must go now before I'm missed. Now, don't forget, the area steps.
A letter in the Times?
Pelham, where are you?
Can I take my hoop, Miss Unwin?
Not today, Pelham. We're all in mourning, remember? Now come along. Quick, Sticks. Run, run, run. Good boy.
What is that you have, Miss Unwin?
It's only a newspaper, Pelham.
That's Grandpapa's newspaper.
Nonsense. Now, just you run about on the grass for 5 minutes while I sit on the bench. Off you go. Letters. Letters. Ah, now, let me see. Yes, the Northumberland Gardens tragedy. Sir, it seems to be the general opinion
that this murder was committed by some inmate or inmates of the house, and very possibly by a member of the female sex. We know that women have murdered men, especially that women scorned have murdered their lovers since the world began, and will do so again before the world ends. Great stress has been laid upon the fact that Mr. Thackerton was known as a person of the utmost respectability. But it is also known that his wife has been an invalid for many years, and we have too many instances of men in that situation seeking solace elsewhere to be able to discount such a possibility altogether. No traces of the murder have been found on the premises, with the single exception of the blood that was observed on the sleeve of the governess's dress. It is clear that she was a person with entree to the murdered man's library, and it must be asked how often was she accustomed to avail herself of this privilege at those hours when, by the custom of the household, Mr. Thackerton was alone there, and had given orders that he was not to be disturbed. It is very possible that some or all of these questions have been answered satisfactorily, but it does not appear from the actions of the official investigators that they have been. They are in everybody's mouth and in everybody's mind, and it is in the interest of the governess, if she be innocent, that they shall be publicly met and dealt with. Signed, Common Sense.
Oh, but this is dreadful, dreadful.
Miss, can we go to the round pond and see the boats?
The round pond? Oh, yes, of course. Come along. And Pelham, nice little boys do not shout.
No, Miss Unwin.
Then pass ye mourners cheerly on, through prayer unto the tomb, still as ye watch life's falling leaf, gathering forever loss and grief, hope of new spring and endless home.
That will do, child. You may go now.
Oh, Mrs. Thackerton, I wanted to ask you something.
Not now, my dear. I'm very weak today. I have undergone a great strain.
It is only a small matter. I wanted to go out shortly, and I want to visit an old friend, a friend of my childhood days who has fallen into poor circumstances and is ill. I thought Mary could take little Pelham for his walk this afternoon, perhaps.
My dear, you ought not to be asking me this, especially now, when I am twice over no longer mistress of the house.
Mrs. Thackerton, I know that I ought to go to Pelham's mother, Mrs. Arthur, to ask this, but may I be frank with you? I much suspect she would forbid my going. It would inconvenience her.
You have said enough.
Oh, I am sorry.
My dear, there are some things that ought to be understood between people without the necessity of speech. Go to your sick friend when you wish, and if the need arises, I shall say that I gave you permission.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Miss Bond.
My maid tells me that you have come from Mr. Arthur Thackerton.
Then I am afraid that your maid misunderstood me. I said that I had come on business concerning him.
I believe that you also told the girl that your business was urgent.
My business is urgent. Perhaps even a matter of life or death.
Not a matter of life or death for me, I trust.
No, for myself.
Then I hope you'll not find yourself disappointed.
I have omitted to tell you my name. It is Harriet Unwin.
Ah, the governess. I thought as much. The governess there has been all the talk about in the Mercury.
Yes, there has been talk, as you call it. And it is because of that talk, because of those atrocious falsehoods, that I have dared to call upon you.
You have dared? Yes, I was beginning to wonder about that. Calling here is a daring enough thing to have done, a very daring thing for a governess in the employ of Arthur Thackerton.
Yes, daring enough to call upon another woman who depends for her daily existence on Mr. Thackerton.
Oh, I don't deny what I am. But you know there's a difference between the two of us. Mr. Thackerton could dismiss you at a moment's notice if he found any cause to do so. But I don't think he's any intention of dismissing me.
No? Perhaps you have had recent reason for believing that. Miss Bond, you know what is being said about me? That I was the person who gave the alarm over Mr. William Thackerton's death, and that this means that in a close household, I am the most likely person to have struck the fatal blow. That and worse. It is not true. None of it is true. But what is true is that some person within those four walls did strike that blow.
Miss Governess, if I wanted to hear any of that, I could read it in the papers.
And it seems you have done so, but you have read to poor purpose. Will you allow me to tell you what are the consequences of what I have just explained? The consequences for you?
Well?
The one person who stood to gain most from old Mr. Thackerton's death is his son and heir, Arthur. He needed money. Needed it badly, did he not?
Yes. No. Why should he need money? What do you mean?
This is what I mean. That here is a room that must have cost a very great deal to furnish so prettily. And it is in a house that must have cost more than a little each month to rent. Where does the money come from?
That is no concern of yours.
I wish it were not. Believe me, I do not like having to come here and say the things I have to say to you. But I have been accused in so many words of killing William Thackerton. Knowing that someone else had very much better reason for doing that than I ever could makes what I asked very much my concern.
That's as may be, but it's certainly no concern of mine.
No? Let me speak quite plainly. To have a murderer as your lover, to have it come out in court one day that he murdered his own father so as to pay your bills, I think that should very much concern you, Miss Bond.
But he isn't. He didn't. Oh, no, miss, you don't catch me that way. It was you, the governess, who was the first to see that body. More like it was you saw the body dead minutes and minutes before you set up the cry of murder. Oh, I know the likes of you, and don't think I'm to be caught in any of your little traps, my fine lady.
Please think of it from my point of view. Let me tell you something. I am not the lady of scant means working as a governess that you've probably taken me for. I'm like you. True, I never had to make my living with a shrimp net.
I did not. Where'd you hear that? Damn lies.
There's no shame in having been what you once were. I'm not ashamed that I was a foundling who came into the world with nothing. So you see, we're two of a kind, you and I. We know what life's like at the bottom of the heap, and we know how hard it is to fight the way up. And something else. Neither you nor I has any intention of sliding back down again. Am I right? So please, won't you tell me the truth? When I know it for sure, I'll be able to see what can be done for both of us.
The truth? What truth?
Arthur Thackerton. Does he have debts because of this house? Were you pressing him for money? And has he said in the last few days that he can and will pay?
There was a telegraph message.
Yes?
It came on the morning after the murder, if you must know. It said he'd pay up after all.
And you had been pressing him?
Yes. I told him if he didn't pay by the next day, I'd go to his old father for the money.
Ah, Miss Unwin, the very person.
Yes, Sergeant. And why, if you please, am I the very person?
Because, madam, I feel it my duty to communicate to you a piece of important intelligence, and Sergeant Drood is not the man to shirk his duty.
But, Sergeant, I should have thought it was your duty to communicate any new intelligence to Mr. Arthur Thackerton.
And so I will, miss. Yet there's one individual, I believe, who has a right to hear it, and that individual is yourself. I make no bounds about stating that it is yourself that I've held under the very gravest suspicion from the outset of this investigation, and not without evidence.
Yes, you saw blood on my dress. Blood that had got there when I went to see if I could tell how long Mr. Thackerton had been dead.
Yes, there's not much escapes my eye, I can tell you. Neither in this house, nor in such other places as I see fit to conduct my inquiries. In places such as the London premises of the Thackerton Patent Steam Moulded Hats Company.
In Mr. Thackerton's London premises?
Yes, indeed, miss. In Mr. Thackerton's office, and in connection with a certain Mr. Ephraim Brattle, confidential clerk to the deceased, as well as having something rather more to do with him.
So, what is it that you have discovered about Mr. Brattle that has suddenly put me out of your reckoning, Sergeant?
Out of my reckoning, miss? Oh, no. I don't think we can go quite as far as that.
But you have come to suspect Mr. Brattle more than anyone else, Sergeant, haven't you? Won't you tell me just what your inquiries at the office brought to light?
You may ask, miss. You may ask, but whether you'll get to know is another question. Still, if you'll take my advice, miss, you'll look in the daily papers tomorrow morning. I dare say you'll find something of interest there. Dear me, yes. Something mightily interesting.
Careful with your milk, Pelham. You're going to spill it.
Yes, Miss Unwin.
Extraordinary.
Something in the Mercury? Not more scurrility about what they are pleased to call the Northumberland Gardens tragedy, I hope.
And why should they not call it that? Surely it's a tragedy when your own father is foully murdered under his own roof.
My dear, I wish you would not interrupt me when there is an article in the Times here concerning events within this house. And I do think I ought to be allowed to try to master it without distraction. But not only events under this roof, but events at the office as well as my place of business.
Please, Papa, what does event mean? Why are we having events under the roof?
Hush, Pelham. You must not talk to your papa while he is reading important things in the newspaper.
But they're things about us, Miss Unwin. Papa said so.
I dare say they are, Pelham, but little boys, you know, should be seen and not heard.
Yes, Miss Unwin.
Apparently the police have made inquiries at the office, and they have found out that Brattle was not only my father's confidential clerk, but that he is also, it appears, the grandson of a man by the name of Gunner, now dead, who is supposed, ridiculously I may say, to have been the inventor of our steam moulding machine, the Thackerton tube. It seems that the police are questioning Brattle at Great Scotland Yard. Well, I suppose, indeed, that the arrest may have already been made, though apparently there is some doubt about the exact time the fatal blow was struck. I dare say Sergeant Drood will be here again this morning to complete his inquiries.
And what was the precise time, miss, that you say you heard Mr. Brattle going upstairs to the servants' attic?
Shortly before 10, Sergeant.
Shortly before 10, no later?
No, Sergeant. I am certain of that.
Very well, miss, you may go.
Thank you. Come, Pelham. It is time for your walk. Are you ready?
Yes, Miss Unwin.
Then we will go to the Round Pond. One moment, Pelham, dear. I think the police sergeant is in the hall. We mustn't disturb him. You can sit on the top step there for a little.
Yes, Miss Unwin.
I'll just go down and see what is happening.
Why should I lie? So now then, young Sheriff, if I was to tell you I had it on best information that Mr. William Thackerton was dead mutton when Ephraim Brattle left that library, would you dare to tell me you heard Mr. Thackerton a coughing and a spluttering after that time?
Look, I tell you it wasn't true, Sergeant. Well, I'd have to tell you so, wouldn't I? Because I did hear the master coughing the way he always did with that little dry cough.
Now listen to me, lad. Listen to me, and I'll tell you a bit of a tale. There was once upon a time a criminal of my acquaintance. Let's call him Dirty Guts. Well, Dirty Guts had committed burglary. I knew it. He knew it. But devil a bit of proof had I got. He knew that. So do you know what, young John?
No, Sergeant.
Now, of course you don't, young John, but I'm going to tell you. In the pocket of Dirty Guts' coat when he was searched before witnesses, what should I happen to find but a silver cruet from that very house he had burgled? Now, what is the moral of that, my lad?
Don't know, Sergeant.
Then I'll tell you. The moral of that is that no one crosses Sergeant Drood and goes away scot-free. No one.
Yeah.
Never.
Look, Sergeant, I heard the master cough. No, honest, I did.
Very well, then, damn you, have your cough, then. I'll look elsewhere. See if I don't.
So if Mr. Thackerton was still alive after Brattle went up to bed, there's no longer a case against him, unless the boy's lying. What is that smell? It's aniseed. John is sucking an aniseed ball. Pelham, I think perhaps we can forget a little about being in mourning now. Would you like to take your hoop with you on our walk?
Oh, yes, please, Miss Unwin.
Then go and fetch it from the toy cupboard like a good boy. I have to go to John's room. I want to talk to him about something. I shan't be very long. John?
Hey?
Where did you get that sweet you're sucking?
I bought it, miss.
Oh, yes? And where did you get money enough to go buying yourself sweets?
Well, I'm getting me wages, didn't I, miss?
Yes. Yes, you do, John. And I happen to know that your last month's wages very nearly all went on a new pair of white gloves, which you had to buy in the place of the ones you lost. Now tell me the truth. Someone put into your pocket the wherewithal to buy that sweet, and a good many more too, didn't they?
No, no, miss, no.
We'll soon see.
But here, you leave that alone, that's mine.
A bag of gobstoppers. And a handkerchief with money in it. 20 shillings. So he gave you a guinea.
No, but
now
he never
don't lie to me. I want to know from your own lips who gave you so much money.
It was Mr. Brattle.
It was to get you to tell that story about hearing the master cough, and to stick to it through thick and thin, wasn't it?
Yes.
Very well. You need not tell me any more now. But you will have to repeat it all to Sergeant Drood at the very earliest opportunity.
Yes, miss. But what'll he do to me?
Well, you would deserve it if you were severely punished. But I dare say the sergeant will be so pleased to hear what you tell him that you'll escape lightly enough.
Come in.
You wanted me to read to you, Ma'am?
Yes, Miss Unwin. You'll find the book there on the side table. Simply read it to me. I feel too weak to make conversation.
Yes, ma'am.
You'll find the bookmark.
High on the summit of the pass stood a solitary inn between them and the sky. At this inn they rested again and drank to the health of Christium and his bride in a jug of country wine. By nightfall tomorrow, he said, I shall hold her once more in my arms. It is now nearly 2 years since I came home to see her at the end of my apprenticeship.
Miss Unwin.
Yes? Am I speaking too loudly? Does it pain you?
No, my dear, no. I have got the headache, it is true, but I am seldom without that. No, I like to hear you read so. I like your vigour, your youth. It is my Godfrey's cordial. I feel I should like a spoonful.
Yes, of course. Let me give it to you. Where is it?
You'll find it in the next room. Simmons left it beside my bed.
I shan't be a moment. Simmons. Miss Simmons. Blood. And a paper knife plunged into her heart. I've got to get help. Mrs. Thackerton will be vexed that I'm taking so long, but I can't leave her to be discovered by the servants. Oh, Joseph.
Was it you that rang, miss?
Yes, Joseph. Another terrible event has occurred. I'm sorry to say that your mistress's lady's maid is dead. She has been stabbed to death. Will you go at once to the police station and fetch an officer? If Sergeant Drood is there, of course, bring him. I will lock the door and keep the keys. Be as quick as you can.
Yes, miss. I'll fetch the sergeant, all right. Don't you worry about that.
Joseph has communicated to me certain information, Miss Unwin, as a result of which I have returned to this house. I now require you to surrender the key to Mrs. Thackerton's bedroom, which I understand is in your possession.
Here it is, Sergeant.
Wilson, you will stay here outside the door with with this lady.
Yes, sir.
While the police surgeon and myself make our examination. This way, sir.
Thank you.
What does he think I'm going to do? Is he worried I might run away?
It's not for me to say, miss.
No, Sergeant.
Not very long. I would estimate well within an hour. Certainly no longer. Yeah. But it may have been very much less.
That's Mrs. Thackerton's bell. I must go to her. Mrs. Thackerton? What is it? Are you unwell?
No, my dear, I'm not ill at all, but I am prey to anxiety. There has been such a disturbance outside. I have heard strange men's voices. What is happening? Where is Simmons? She should have heard my bell. What is it, my dear? Has there been some new tragedy?
Yes, I'm afraid that there has. There has been another murder. I am sorry to have to tell you that Miss Simmons is...
Oh, no, no, no.
I am afraid that it is, yes. Try to take it calmly. But poor Miss Simmons is dead. She has been murdered, too, in almost the same manner.
Where's that woman? Have you let her get away?
No, Sergeant, she was
Didn't I give you an order?
What is it? What's happening out there?
Let her escape.
This is not to be borne.
Who has only just come from the scene of the crime, a woman with blood on her hands, escape.
Sergeant, let me tell you that I scorn to escape from either the constable or yourself. And let me tell you, too, that I am not a woman with blood on my hands.
Miss Unwin, Sergeant, please come here.
Young woman, your employer is calling you. Go in. Go in. You called, madam? If it is in my power to be of assistance, glad to oblige. Glad to oblige.
Yes, Sergeant. There is something you can do for me.
And what is that, madam?
You can listen to me, Sergeant.
I shall greatly enjoy the privilege of listening to you, madam.
Well, I have one thing only to say, and I trust you will hear it with attention.
Certainly, madam.
Then, Sergeant, do I understand that you have implied that you believe the person who has killed poor Simmons committed the crime only just before it was discovered?
Well, yes. That is to say, I do believe it to be a fact that the unfortunate woman was done to death only a very short time before the governess purported to discover the corpus.
Indeed, Sergeant? Purported?
Yes, madam. I regret to have to inform you that such is the conclusion I have come to, taking into account a good deal of experience I have had in such matters.
I see. Well, then, I see that it is my duty to tell you, Sergeant, that Miss Unwin was here in this room with me for at least half an hour before I asked her to fetch some medicine for me from my bedroom. Does that alter your opinion of matters? And now, Sergeant, I am not well, and I must ask you to leave me to rest.
Of course, madam. Sergeant Drood is not one to give unnecessary trouble to a lady. I shall see to it that the utmost quiet is kept outside your room.
Thank you, Sergeant. You may go, Miss Unwin.
Thank you, Ma'am. Sergeant, if you have no further need of me, I should like to go and make sure Mrs. Arthur Thackerton is aware of what has happened.
Now, miss, I don't see how I can put any particular questions to you at the present moment.
Then I will say good day.
Yes, miss. Say good day to Sergeant Drood by all means. It is a good day for you, a lucky day. But remember this, miss. Times change. Luck changes. A good day may turn into a bad day before all's done.
I do not forget such things, Sergeant, I assure you.
Good day, then.
Why did she lie about the time? Why is she protecting me? Well, it doesn't solve the problem of who killed William Thackerton and poor Simmons. Mr. Arthur would have been at his office at this time of the day. But then Brattle would have been at the office as well. But here he is. Mr. Brattle? Mr. Brattle?
Miss Unwin, isn't it?
Mr. Brattle, I have a somewhat curious question to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Could we perhaps step into the dining room? Mr. Brattle, have you been in the house very long?
An hour or so.
I am surprised to find you here at all. I should have thought that at this hour you would be at Mr. Thackerton's office.
I should have been there, but I was told to meet Mr. Arthur Thackerton here. Yes, I dare say you know that I was taken last night to Great Scotland Yard under suspicion of having murdered Mr. William Thackleton.
I had heard something to the effect.
Well, when I learned that I was to be released this morning, there was no case against me, you know. I was told that Mr. Arthur had urgent orders for Lancashire and would be at home here to give them to me.
And have you seen him?
Not yet. I understand he is in the library, when I had been put to wait in Mr. Melling's pantry. I had waited so long that I was coming to see whether I had been forgotten when you called out to me just now.
You are perhaps wondering why I called to you, what it is I have to say to you.
Well, you have something to say, no doubt.
Yes, I have, Mr. Brattle. I have to ask you this. Why did you give John that guinea?
What guinea?
No, please, do not try to pretend with me, Mr. Brattle. I will tell you exactly what I know. I overheard John declaring to Sergeant Drood that he had heard Mr. Thackleton alive after the time you had left the library. But there was something about young John, all the while the sergeant was questioning him. I found he had been sucking a sweet. Now, I happen to know he has no money for sweets. I questioned him, and in no time he confessed to me who had given him a guinea.
You have told all this to the sergeant?
I have taken steps to see that he will be informed. But no, I have no opportunity of talking to him directly.
Then may I beg you not to do so?
If you will explain why.
It is because if you do, the sergeant will have every reason to believe again that I killed Mr. Thackleton. And I did have good reason to, a better reason than he has ever suspected. I dare say you know that Mr. Thackleton's father had cheated my grandfather, Mr. Gunner, out of all that he might have made from his invention, the Gunner tube, as I call it. It is the very key to the steam moulding process for hat-making, you know.
Yes, I do know. And I suppose that does give you cause to hate and distrust the Thackleton family. But then why did you become Mr. Thackleton's confidential clerk?
Well, I will tell you why, in all frankness. I took advantage of the fact that my name is Brattle and not Gunner to take a post in the firm with the sole intention of getting revenge for what had been done to my mother's father. Yes, I planned and plotted to work my way forward till I was in a position to do Mr. Thackleton some real harm. That was something that took me a good many patient years of endeavour to achieve. But, will you believe me, I found that during those years I had become a changed man, and that in the end I cared no longer for the revenge, but for the work that I had learned to do.
I am inclined to believe you, Mr. Brattle.
So you should. It is the honest truth. So, when the time came, instead of taking what steps I could to ruin Mr. Thackleton, I came to him here, in this house, and asked him for a loan to start up in business for myself in the straw hat line where we could not be rivals.
And Mr. Thackleton refused you?
Yes, Mr. Thackleton refused me.
And when you had seen that his refusal would be adamant, you left him and made your way up to bed. I heard your tread passing the schoolroom door.
But was it the tread of a murderer? I ask you that.
No, Mr. Brattle, it was not.
Simmons. Well, I mean, keeps herself to herself, and never a word for the likes of me. But all the same, to go and get herself murdered, and you finding the body and all. Was there blood over everything, then?
No, there wasn't all that much blood. But if Sergeant Drood gets one solid piece of evidence against me... He's waiting to leap on me, I know, waiting like a garrotter in hiding.
Well, but what evidence can he get? There ain't none, is there?
I suspect he means to dig out something, even if it's something he knows is false. Remember the story he told John about dirty guts?
Oh, but you're safe, Unwin. There ain't no silver cruet he could slip into your pocket. No, nothing like it.
Well, I hope there isn't. Because if he were to do that, then there would be even less chance than there is now of me being able to put him on the road to Maida Vale that you went on, Wilkins, dear.
Yeah, that's where he ought to be put. Right enough. I mean, up to see the lady there and learn all about how much she owes and who's got to pay the bills.
How I wish he could be persuaded to do that.
Oh, so all we can do is hope, Unwin.
But I can't rely on hope forever, my dear. If by the end of Monday there's been no change, then I shall do my best to tackle Sergeant Drood, come what may.
And tomorrow?
Tomorrow is Sunday, and I suppose nothing will happen then. Come, Pelham. Walk a little faster, please. Your mamma and papa are drawing ahead.
There's a great crowd of people outside the church.
It's the fine weather, I expect, Pelham.
I've never seen so many.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the governess.
Murderers!
Murderers!
Murderess! What do they mean? What are they talking about?
Pelham, quickly, come with me at once.
Yes, Mamma.
Let him seduce you, did you? Dirty cat!
Not fit to look after anyone, let alone a child.
Get inside the church as quickly as you can. And don't sit anywhere near us.
You should have sacked the filthy creature long ago.
All creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, the Lord...
The service will be over in a few minutes. Will they still be waiting for me? Will I have to face them again? What right have they to treat me like that? Is that why I'm being punished? Because I've worked my way up from the workhouse? Is that some sort of sin? But I deserve to have got where I am now. I'm not going to let myself be intimidated by them.
Stay where you are, Miss Unwin. Don't leave the church with us. Just stay in your pew until everyone has gone. And don't attempt to come back into the house until I have taken Pelham back.
And that's the end of your job, my girl. It will be instant dismissal for you when you get back. And you'll be lucky to get a bed at the governess's benevolent institution, let alone sleep in your own room. But by then I shan't even be a governess. Shall I have to ring the servants' bell when I get back to the house? No. I have earned the right to use the visitor's bell, and I shall exercise it.
That'll be her, Constable.
Yes, Sergeant.
Miss Harriet Unwin.
Yes, Sergeant. Were you waiting to see me?
Waiting, yes. To see you, yes. To have a word with you. Yes, indeed.
Well, Sergeant, here I am.
I have just one question to ask you, miss.
Very well. I shall do my best to answer.
Now, what I have to ask you is this. Do you recognise this handkerchief?
Handkerchief? Why, yes, it is mine. It has my initials on it.
So it does, to be sure. A H and a U. Well, well. Then, miss, do you deny what this handkerchief is stained with? What could it be, Miss Harriet Unwin?
Sergeant Drood, where did you take this handkerchief from?
I take it, I assure you, miss, I did not take this handkerchief, which you have admitted before witnesses.
Certainly, Sergeant.
To be yours. I did not take it from anywhere at all. It was brought to me by a reliable and public-spirited person who will, if necessary, aver to that fact in court.
What do you mean, brought to you?
Sergeant Drood is a man who's apt to mean what he says, miss, as perhaps you'll come to know.
I dare say, Sergeant. But I ask you once again, where did you get this handkerchief, which ought to be in a drawer in my room? Who was this person who brought it to you? And what is that stain on it?
Well, now, miss, what would you say the stain is? Allow me to show it to you more clearly.
Take it away.
Well, miss, what do you say now this handkerchief is stained with?
I would say that it would seem to be stained with blood. Though whose blood it might be, I cannot say. Did one of the servants cut herself? Did she snatch up the handkerchief when she happened to be in my room? Is that it?
Won't do, miss, won't do at all. Now, supposing I was to tell you where this handkerchief was found, do you think you might sing a different tune then?
I have no idea where the handkerchief could have been found. As I told you, it ought to have been found, if it was found at all, in a drawer in my bedroom.
Well, it was not. It was found exactly where it was hidden.
What do you mean, Sergeant?
I mean, Harriet Unwin, I arrest you on a charge of murdering one Martha Simmons on or about the 4th of the present month, and I caution you that whatever you say will be taken down and may be used against you.
Can I help you, Sergeant?
You can indeed, Constable Smithers. I brought you a female on a charge of murder.
Well, I'm afraid I don't see how I can accommodate her. Don't see it at all.
Then you'll have to stir yourself and make shift. She's to be kept here till Mr. Superintendent Heavytree comes over from Great Scotland Yard. Them's orders.
But we're full up. Drunken disorderlies by the dozen.
Not so full as you can't take one female up on a charge of murder.
Well, I'll have to put her in solitary.
You do that then, Smithers, just so long as she's here, ready and waiting for Mr. Heavytree.
Yes, Sergeant.
Miss Harriet Unwin. Well, now, let us see what we can do about you.
I am at your service, sir.
I'm very glad to hear it. Now, just let me ring for a shorthand writer, and then we'll get your confession down on paper, all in the proper way.
Oh, no, sir. There is no question of my confessing to anything.
What's that?
I should like you to understand. My arrest was a grave mistake on the part of Sergeant Drood.
Oh, this will do you no good, you know. No good at all.
On the contrary, sir. Since I am guiltless, saying so as clearly as I can should do me nothing but good.
Now, my girl, no anger, I beg of you. No shouting. That sort of thing doesn't become a young lady.
Young lady? You call me a young lady? Do you know just how much of a young lady I am, or just how little of one? Hasn't your precious sergeant found out yet?
Yeah, so that's the way of things, is it? You know, it's astonishing how often something of that sort turns up in a murder case. You wouldn't think the bounds of society are broken as often as they are. You'd think, if you hadn't had my sad experience, that people stayed in the station in life in which it had pleased the Almighty to place them. But no. Well, I must see that Drood acquires the full particulars. They'll be needed at the trial.
But, Superintendent, whatever my origins, I did not murder Mrs. William Thackerton's maid Simmons. What proof that I did has Sergeant Drood obtained?
Well, I'm sorry to find you taking that tune, my girl. But since you ask, I'll tell you. The sergeant, who is a keen investigator, has obtained, firstly, a cambric handkerchief with your initials embroidered on it, stained with blood.
But where did he obtain that handkerchief?
He got it, young woman, from where you had hidden it. In the coal scuttle in the room next to where you killed that poor soul Simmons, in among the sea coals, which you might well have believed would have been tipped onto the fire, but, for once, old Mrs. Thackerton did not require a fire.
Well, if my handkerchief was found where you say, then it was put there by someone who wished to implicate me in the crime or who wished to injure me. Tell me who brought the handkerchief to Sergeant Drood.
Well, let me see. Oh, yes. That handkerchief was brought to Sergeant Drood by one Mary Wilkins, or Vilkins, second housemaid.
Vilkins? Impossible. Superintendent, I'm afraid I do not believe you.
It's written here plain as plain in Drood's report. Listen. At or about 10:30 a.m., the second housemaid, one Mary Wilkins, or Vilkins, came to me carrying a coal scuttle. In that scuttle I observed a cambric handkerchief with a reddish or brownish stain upon it, which I later ascertained to be blood. I asked the said Wilkins, or Vilkins, under what circumstances she had made her discovery. She answered that while she was cleaning the room, she had occasion to notice that the coal scuttle was not full. Wishing to remedy this, she requested Joseph Green, the second footman,
Stop.
to go...
Now I understand how the handkerchief got into the scuttle. Joseph Green put it there.
Oh, that's nonsense. How could Joseph Green get hold of your handkerchief and get blood onto it, eh? Come now. That was the blood of the murdered woman, and you must know it to be so.
No. The blood on my handkerchief is by no means necessarily that of poor Simmons. It could well be from any meat that came into the kitchen. A hung hair, for instance.
Blood from a hare. Joseph Green deliberately splashed a handkerchief of yours with hare's blood and then put it in the scuttle. Now, don't go making things worse for yourself by making wild accusations of that sort. Why should Joseph Green do a thing like that?
Because of the stolen sugar mice. He stole some sugar mice. I caught him, reported him.
Yes, sugar mice, I see. Now, listen to me, young lady. Shall we now call in that shorthand writer and get this business over, once and for all?
No, sir. I have nothing more to say.
Can't I persuade you? It is for your own good, you know. A full confession is much the best way.
I have nothing to confess.
Very well. We shall bring you up before the magistrates tomorrow morning. They won't have any doubts about committing you for trial. And then it'll be the Old Bailey. You won't like it, you know.
I dare say. But it seems I have no alternative.
Oh, so hard. So convinced in evil and so young. Is there nothing I can do for you?
Why, yes, sir. I should very much welcome a change of clothes. Would you be so good as to have a message sent to number 3 Northumberland Gardens? Perhaps the second housemaid could come round with what is necessary.
Yes. Yes, I'll see to that. It's the least I can do. And remember, if you should change your mind...
I don't think I will do that. But thank you for your consideration, Mr. Heavytree.
Visitor for you, Unwin.
Wilkins, how good to see you again.
10 minutes, no longer.
Oh, Unwin, you're in trouble all right now. Yes, I'm in worse trouble than I ever thought I would be.
Well, what are they going to do with you? They ain't going to hang you right off, are they?
Oh, no, my dear. They won't quite do that. They're going to take me before the magistrates tomorrow. I shall probably be remanded in custody for trial at the Old Bailey.
The Old Bailey? Oh, that ain't very good.
No, it isn't good at all. I am innocent of all they allege against me, but I cannot see how I can prove it to them. Wilkins, my dear, I now know who did commit both murders, but there's nothing I can do to prove what I know.
You know who it is, then?
Yes. At first I thought it might be Mr. Arthur.
On account of Miss Rhoda Bond?
Yes. But now I know it wasn't. It was...
Joseph, I bet.
Why, yes. It was Joseph. But how did you know?
A nasty piece of work, always was.
I'm afraid so, my dear. Since I've been here, I've worked it all out. It was a phrase of the superintendent's that set me thinking. When I told him about the handkerchief, he said, "Why on earth should Joseph Green do a thing like that?" Well, why should he? Unless he wished to make it appear that I had murdered Simmons, to deflect suspicion from himself. All the time, I had been thinking that his attitude towards me was mere petty spite, because I'd caught him stealing sugar mice. But now I realise the truth.
He did it, and he tried to shove the blame on you. But why did he do it?
Because Mr. William Thackerton was his natural father.
Oh, well, no wonder he put on all them airs and graces.
He even has the look of the Thackertons when one thinks about it.
But where's Simmons, the maid?
The long-serving Simmons. She must have been Mr. Thackerton's mistress long ago.
Oh, so Simmons was
Joseph's mother. I think old Mrs. Thackerton knew.
Oh, it's horrible. His father and his mother. But why, Unwin, why?
I can only guess. Perhaps Joseph had ambitions to rise in the world. Knowing himself to be William Thackerton's son, he wasn't content to remain a second footman, and when his father refused his request, Joseph seized the knife and lashed out.
But he must have got some blood on himself.
On his gloves, I suspect, which he then threw out of the window and disposed of later.
No, he must have stolen John's gloves then.
I expect so. I should have noticed that he wasn't wearing gloves when I discovered him outside the library door, and he looked so white and...
No wonder. Oh, I said he was a nasty piece of work.
Oh, if only I had some proof, some scrap of proof.
That Joseph, I knew all along. And then this very afternoon, him trying to break into Simmons's room. Dare say he thought there'd be some nice pickings.
Trying to break into Simmons' room? Did he succeed? Tell me quickly, did he get into the room?
Well, of course he didn't. Not with me coming along and disturbing him. But he made a joke of it. But I know he'll try again. He wasn't making no joke about trying to get in there.
Wilkins, there must be something in Simmons' room that Joseph thinks would prove him guilty. He must be stopped. But how are we going to do it?
Oh, you're in a real pickle, Unwin. And you a lady, too.
A lady? Wilkins, we are the same height and the same figure, are we not?
Yeah.
Now listen, I want to change clothes with you.
Change clothes?
Yes. Then call the constable to let you go out. But I'll go out instead. They won't come to look at you again till 9 o'clock, when they bring you bread and cocoa.
I need that time to go back to Northumberland Gardens and get into Simmons' room before Joseph does.
Oh, but you won't be able to break in there.
No, but old Mrs. Thackerton keeps a spare set of keys to the house.
Right, then go on, Anwen. Go on. Here, take this bonnet while I get out of my dress. Quick now, Anwen. And now, tie the bonnet. Lovely. Oh, now, here's my purse.
Oh, Wilkins, I couldn't possibly...
Take it, Anwen. Don't be a fool. You'll need to take a cab. You can't afford to waste a single second. Are you ready?
Ready.
Oh, here we go, then. Constable! Constable! Good luck, Anwen. Thank you.
You've been long enough.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Goodbye, then, miss.
You want a great rush all of a sudden?
I wanted to get back to my place. They'll create something terrible if I'm any later.
You're all the same, you girls. Well, you can find your own way out. I'm not chasing after the likes of you.
Now I am here, how am I going to get in? I can hardly ring the visitor's bell dressed in Wilkins' clothes. And what if it's Joseph who answers the door? And if I ring the servant's bell, they're bound to ask all sorts of awkward questions. Dinner. They'll be serving dinner now, so one of the maids will come. And if I get funny looks, I'll just have to brave it out.
Hannah, I am happy to tell you that the misunderstanding has been satisfactorily cleared up at the police station.
Oh, goodness.
I will go up to my room now, and when Mr. Arthur has dined, I shall come down and tell him.
Yes, miss. Only the master ain't dining at home tonight. But Mrs. Arth... The mistress is here, of course.
Oh, then I shall see her. And old Mrs. Thackerton?
Oh, Mrs. Thackerton ain't at all well. She's in bed. Fast asleep in her bed, I dare say.
Yes, of course. Yes. Poor Mrs. Thackerton. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, miss.
A great deal to do and very little time to do it in. And what if they've already discovered Wilkins? Just take things calmly. First, the keys from Mrs. Thackerton's sitting room. But which is Simmons's room? What if I open Nancy's door and she's in there? But if Joseph tried to break in, wouldn't there be marks? Yes. A whole line of scratches near the lock. This must be the one. But which key? No, try this one. We'll be finishing dinner at this rate. Oh, good. Now, where would she have hidden it? The chest of drawers? But if Sergeant Drood searched the room, he'd have hardly missed the chest of drawers or the bed. So where? Where would I hide something in here? Behind the mirror? No. Under a loose board. That's the place. No nails in this one, just holes. Oh, a small packet wrapped in oilskin. That must be it.
And what are you doing here, Mary Margaret?
Oh, Joseph!
Miss Unwin. And how did you get out of your cell, my fine lady?
That doesn't matter much now, does it?
Not much. You've stood in my way too long, Miss Unwin. I don't quite see how I'm going to get out of this new scrape you've got me into. But I dare say I'll think of a way. I've done it each time before, haven't I?
It wasn't me who got you into your scrapes. It was your own greed and your own pride and nothing more.
Was it, my girl? Was it then? Well, I'll tell you what's going to get me out of it now. Now and forever. And that's this old kitchen knife. I brought it to force the door. But it'll stand me in better stead now. Oh, come on now, miss. You're not going to get very far with that great heavy water jug. Won't help you a bit. Not when you think how light and swift a knife can be.
Get back from me!
Oh, gonna make a fight of it? It's more than the other two did.
Yes, your own mother and your own father both dead at your hand.
In my way. Both of them. He owed me. And he thought he'd never have to pay. And she'd have betrayed me sooner or later. I saw she was ready to do it. And now, you're going to join them!
I think I've killed him. This time I've really done it, oh my God. How am I going to prove my innocence now?
Name, Joseph. Name and surname of father, William Thackerton. Name and surname of mother, Martha Simmons. Joseph Green. I've had my eye on that fellow ever since he took that cab ride with me from Great Scotland Yard the night Mr. Thackerton was killed. There was something about the way he said you had been the first to discover the body that never rang true to me. You can't put much past me in that line, you know. Not very much at all.
No, Sergeant. I am sure no one could.
What a fine ending to the case, eh? What a triumph it is. I'll tell you something. This is the first time Sergeant Drood has made use of a lady collaborator.
Collaborator?
The very first time. Well now, miss, we'll soon have that fellow conspirator of yours out of durance vile.
Why, bless me. She hasn't touched her cocoa.
Wilkins. It's me, Unwin.
Oh.
Wilkins. I've come to take you out of here.
Oh, Unwin. Oh, it's really you.
It's all right, my dear. Everything's all right now. Joseph caught me in Simmons' room and he tried to kill me. And they know now that he murdered Mr. Thackerton and Simmons as well. I thought I'd killed him. But they brought him here and put him in a cell. It's all as right can be.
Oh, well, that ain't so bad then, is it?
Harriet Unwin was played by Angela Pleasance, and Sergeant Drood by James Bolam. Wilkins, Emily Richard. Joseph, Steve Hodson. John, Stephen Tompkinson. Ephraim Brattle, Kim Wall. William Thackerton, Jack May. Arthur Thackerton, Tony Matthews. Mrs. Arthur Thackerton, Susan Jameson. Grandmother Thackerton, Joan Matheson. Pelham, James Holland. Miss Rhoda Bond, Marion Diamond. Constable Smethers, Michael Troughton. Superintendent Heavytree, Stephen Thorne. And Common Sense of the Times, John Rye. With Victoria Carling, Alan Dudley, Anthony Jackson, David Sinclair, and Eva Stewart. The Governess was dramatized by Barry Campbell and Michael Bakewell from the novel by Evelyn Harvey and directed by Jane Morgan.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London. The Black Museum, a museum of death. Yes, here in the grim stone structure on the Thames, which houses Scotland Yard, is a warehouse of homicide, where everyday objects, a fountain pen, a cufflink, a high-heeled shoe, all are touched by murder. Here's a scarf, torn and ragged, the faded tartan, a cheap reproduction of the honorable colors of the Stuarts, red with green blue crossings and a double-over check of white and yellow. This scarf belonged to Walter Hoffman Piewski, known to the police and his friends in the underworld as the Pike.
There's no doubt about this scarf being his property, Superintendent. He was wearing it when he was sent to Dartmoor 10 years ago.
The description tallies, does it?
Exactly. It's all written down in the prison property book, even to the patch on it.
So the Pike's our man. Right. Well, get him.
And get him they did. And all because of a scarf, appropriately known in Cockney circles as a choker. The pike applied his choker to a human throat, the throat of the driver of a post office van. The pike pulled the choker too hard. It was instrumental in convicting him of murder. And that's why it's earned its place here in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum. In just a moment, you will hear The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles. Now, The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles.
Well, here we are in the Black Museum. Beyond these grey walls, the mighty roar of London never stops. But in here, it's quiet. Come with me under the frieze of death masks, the masks of criminals of bygone days, suspended grimly under the ceiling. Come. To our right and left, rows of murder exhibits, each one carefully labeled. That cut-glass scent spray is attractive even now. Might even take its place on Madame's dressing table, till we stop and read the label written under it. Yes, it's been used to spray anesthetic over the faces of helpless women as a prelude to murder. No sickly aroma now, as we squeeze the bulb. Except for its grim associations, the fragile exhibit is insignificant, easily broken. But it was strong enough to hang the man who used it. There's a brass candlestick. Over there, a taper to go with it. Now, here we are. Here's what we're looking for. The faded tartan scarf. As I take it out of the showcase, I ask you to come with me back to the time when this scarf was new, 15 years ago. Walter Pievsky bought it from a stallholder in one of London's famous street markets, Petticoat Lane.
Yes, sir. We'll take one of the scarves, mister.
Right, sir. Finest worsted woven. What's your clan? Campbell's, Cameron's, MacDonald or MacLeod? All genuine tartan today down from the islands.
All right. I've bought it already. Don't need to give me that stuff. I'll take this one.
It's the Stuart, and better than that you cannot do. Not half a nicker, not 5 bob, half a crown, and cheap at the price. Thank you very much. Come and get your Scotch chokers from Honest John Mackay. If your neck's warm...
While Honest John continued his honest trade, the pike went about his own particular business. It was less exhausting than John's, and it was worked from a public call box. In professional circles, they called it the hospital trick.
Hello? Is that Mrs. Peterson speaking?
Yes, who's that?
The London Hospital here, Mrs. Peterson.
Hospital? Why, what's happened?
Oh, there's no need for immediate alarm, but I'm sorry to say that your husband has met with a serious accident.
Oh, Bill? Is he hurt? Oh, no, what's happened?
He was knocked down by a bus in the Whitechapel Road about half an hour ago.
A mean, crude trick. But more often than not, it worked. While the stricken woman hurried to the hospital to find the husband, who of course was not hurt at all, the pike would visit her house. With the coast clear, he would help himself to whatever he could lay his hands on and get out before the bewildered woman returned. And you notice that the pike could almost camouflage that accent he had. This gift gave him a confidence which was almost his undoing. One time when he and some friends were removing the entire contents of a house while the owners were away on holiday.
What about the piano, Pike? Do we take that?
Of course we take everything. Who'd think of moving out and leaving the piano behind, eh?
You'll get us blooming well, won't you, Will? OK, boys, piano next. Oh, crikey, the phone. Here, what do we do about that? Let it ring, I suppose.
No. Maybe it's someone's seen the van outside and checking up. I'd better answer it.
Yeah, go easy,
Don't worry, Ed. I know my job, don't I?
Oh, yeah.
Hello?
Is that Mr. Wilson?
No, I'm awfully sorry. He won't be back until about 7 o'clock. I'm his brother-in-law. Can I help you?
If your sister's there...
Oh, Julie's just gone out for half an hour. Can I take a message?
Yes, I think you can. I'm her brother. Who the blazes are you?
Quick, boys. Let's get out of here.
Righto.
So the piano was left behind after all. But Pike got away with most of the household belongings and observed, not only were his operations becoming bolder, but he had planned his action carefully. He even knew that Mrs. Wilson's first name was Julie, but he didn't know she had a brother. That must have shaken him, because from then on he changed his tactics. The Pike entered the motor racket, a racket which was to take him in turn from Dartmoor prison to the scaffold. But in his early days as a motor thief, there was still a trace of strange humor about his work. The padlock car was a case in point.
Who's that?
Okay, Eddie, it's only me. You wouldn't go reaching for a gun when Parky walks in on you.
Oh, no. I'm sorry, Pike. Gets me nerves.
Well, relax. Now, listen to me. I've got a job for you.
No. I'm laying off for a bit.
Okay, well, who pays the rent?
Oh, I'm only going in for the small stuff.
Well, this is a small job I'm offering you.
What is it, busting into the Bank of England, eh?
No. It's a simple matter of knocking off a nice new motor.
Well, what's the dope?
Well, it's this way. The car belongs to a fellow named Lambert who lives at 14 Graysdyke Crescent. See? He can't get it into the garage beside the house on account of it being too big.
Why didn't the mug measure it before he bought it?
Well, that's not our concern. He locks the car up at night, and I've obtained a duplicate set of keys.
Oh, nice work. Yeah, what do you want me in on the job for? You can do it yourself.
Oh, there is a little complication.
Oh, I thought there would be.
This fellow Lambert is like a mother with a child over this car. He fixes it to a lamppost every night with 2 big padlocks and a double chain. Wonder he doesn't put a nappy on it, too.
What do we do? Take the lamppost as well as the car?
Well, before I tell you, are you in with me?
All right, Pike. I'm in.
Then listen to what I tell you.
In the early hours of the following morning, the Pike and his assistant went along to Graysdyke Crescent, and there, sure enough, chained to the lamppost outside number 14, was a fine new motor car, its cellulose and chromium work glinting invitingly under the lamplight.
Smash on it, eh? What did I tell you? We can clean up 450 on this, and all we've got to do is to remove the back wheel, which is chained to the lamppost. We put on the spare and we're away.
Okay, Pike. Let's get cracking.
The offending wheel was removed from the axle and left, still chained, to the lamppost. And by the light of the helpful rays from above, the spare wheel was bolted on, the tools were replaced in the boot, and the 2 men climbed into the car.
I hope that ignition key of yours works, Pike.
Of course it works. I tried it out last night.
Ah, good for you.
And here we go. I told you it was going to be easy, didn't I, Ed?
It's money for old rope. You're a good one, you are, Pike. Just let me know when you need any more help. I'm your man.
Walter Pievsky pulled his tartan scarf snugly around his throat and agreed that he would certainly keep his assistant in mind. The car itself was taken to a garage, where its numbers and appearance were carefully changed and, in due course, found its way by devious routes back to the open market. The Pike, of course, had to split the profits, which hurt him, so on his next job, he decided to work alone. And it was the next job which put him on the long, long walk which was to finish on the scaffold.
Now, what's the number of that garage? Ah, here it is. I've got it. If this works, Spock, my lad, you're in the money. But it all depends on how good I can sound on the phone. I'll copy my father's voice, rest his soul. Here we go.
Green's Motors, good evening.
Hello? Brins?
Yes, sir. Can I help you?
My name is Maurice Bluet of 17 Granford Court.
Oh, yes, sir. I know. The big block of flats in Colleton Drive.
That's right. I am staying here with a friend, Major General Lewis.
Oh, yes, sir.
He tells me that you have a new Rolls Coupe in your showroom.
Yes, sir. Indeed we have.
Yes, well, I'm anxious to take such a car back to the continent with me, but time is pressing.
Are
and,
you at 17 Granford Court now, sir?
Yes, if someone could bring round the car, I should like to see it.
Right, I'll be with you in a quarter of an hour, sir.
Are you sure that is not too much trouble?
Oh, no trouble at all, sir. Thank you very much for ringing.
Thank you. I shall be waiting for you.
15 minutes later, the car drove up to the block of flats. The driver salesman got out and went inside. Entering the lift, he went up to the third floor and knocked on the door of number 17. Needless to say, the occupier had never heard of either Maurice Bluet or Major General Lewis. But while the questions and explanations sorted themselves out, Walter Pievsky was already driving the luxury car toward the garage where practiced hands were waiting to completely change its identity. First, what the Pike did not know was that he had provided the police with a vital clue that was to lead him first to prison and then, by reason of the tartan scarf, to the gallows. But the scarf was yet to earn its place, of course, among these strange exhibits here in the Black Museum.
In just a moment, we will continue with The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles. And now we continue with The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles.
We return to Walter Pievsky, known as the Pike, elated at the success of his confident scar trick. He made a handsome profit on the rolls, and despite the fact that the police subsequently traced it, they never traced the theft back to the Pike, not until he tried the same operation again. Certainly he changed the district, but, as is so often the case with a regular criminal, he develops regular habits, and the routine served up to the local garage was almost exactly as before.
Yes, I'm staying with Sir Leslie, and he tells me you've got that straight 8 in the showroom. I'm most anxious to take a car back to the continent with me, but time is pressing, and
I'll
you
be
see...
delighted to bring the car round to you right away, sir, if that's convenient.
If you're sure that it's not too much trouble...
No trouble at all, sir. I'll be with you in 10 minutes.
Oh, that is most kind. Thank you. Excellent.
But you wouldn't think it was so excellent from your point of view if you knew what was happening at the garage, Pike.
Hello, give me the police. Is that Scotland Yard?
Yes, information room.
Listen, my name is Slater. I run a garage, Carlsbrook Street, North 1.
Yes, sir.
A few weeks ago, the local police warned me about a car thief who worked a telephone trick, asking salesmen to take cars round to fake addresses for inspection.
He just rung you, has he, Mr. Slater?
Yeah. It might be him, or it might be genuine. but he asked me to take a car round to 21 Golston Court, Kenmare Street.
On the advice of Scotland Yard, Mr. Slater took the car to Golston Court. To make it easier for the thief, he left the doors unlocked and went into the building. When he was safely inside, the Pike left his telephone box and walked smartly over to the waiting motor. There were just two things he didn't know. First, an ignition wire had been snipped, and second, he was being watched. She'll never start until that broken wire is mended, Pike. You're wasting your time. You're going to waste a lot more time, too. 7 years, to be exact.
Hello, sir. You having a bit of starting trouble?
Oh, hello, officer. Yes, I don't know what's happened here.
I'm used to this sort of thing, so is the other constable here.
Oh, there's two of you.
There's a lot more at the end of the road. Suppose you hop out of that and let us see whether we can't get the car going for you.
No, I can manage.
All the same, you might let us have a go for you.
Okay.
That's the idea. Are you the owner of this car? Hold him, George. He's got a knuckle there, sir.
Let me go, you swamp!
No, you don't. Oh, God. Put the bracelets on him, quick. You all right, 71?
Oh.
How is he?
Looks as if his jaw's broken, Inspector.
Right. Take this man to the station. What's his name?
I'm talking.
Very well. I'm charging you with grievous bodily harm and resisting arrest for the attempted theft of this vehicle. There may be further charges.
There were further charges, including the theft of the big rolls. Walter Piewski, alias the Pike, had played the same game once too often, and a search of his flat in the East End produced more evidence of his varied career in crime. The police had been waiting for him to make his first mistake. This time he'd done it. At the Old Bailey, he pleaded guilty to over 100 crimes, and there were hundreds more with which he was never charged. He was sent to prison for 7 years, and immediately on his reception, his personal belongings were entered in the property book, and he was wearing the tartan scarf, which later was to hang him.
Silhouette, grey, 7.5. Collar, 16, brown. One scarf, red background, green and blue stripes, white and yellow overcheck.
The Clan Stewart.
How do you know that, Peevski?
The fellow I bought it from in Petticoat Lane told me.
I'll take his word for it. Oh, there's a small tear, 5 inches from one corner. Been roughly patched. Better put that down.
Don't worry, boys. I won't accuse you of doing it.
Don't you worry. I'll be retired by then. 1 pair leather gloves, size 8. 1 pair black socks, 10. Brown shoes, neat.
The tartan scarf had been duly entered, and little did the retiring prison officer dream that his hastily scribbled details were to be subsequently brought up as key evidence in a murder trial. But Piewski signed the list of his personal property, and for the next 7 years he was a guest of His Majesty's government in the most famous prison in England, Dartmoor. But in 1946, justice had run its course. The Pike was given back his personal property, which included the tartan scarf, of course, all duly signed for, and so he was released upon a battle-scarred London. Time passed, and he added to his lawful wages by meager pickings from the black market, and more time passed, until one day the inspiration came to him like a bolt from the blue. He mulled it over in his mind. He carried out the research, and not until the plans were cut and dried did he put Ed Javison in the picture.
This is it. This is going to be the clean-up, Eddie.
Yeah, what is it, Pike?
We're going to stick up a post office van, see?
A post office van?
I've been standing in for a chap selling papers right outside a big post office in the West End. Every night I watch the mailbags coming out and going into the vans around 6 o'clock. Well, the other night I hired a car and followed one. It cut through Preston News to Park Lane.
Did you say you hired a car?
Yes, what about it?
Never mind. Go on.
Well, I had it out 3 nights and I found the vans don't change their route. It's the Mews every time. Cuts off a bit of traffic, you see?
Yeah, go on.
Now, the Mews are very dark. Badly bombed and no residents that I could see.
Yeah, I'll get it, yeah.
All we have to do is get a fast car and wait there until the last van comes through.
Yeah, how many are there?
Only 2. We draw our car out in the path of the second one, as if we were going to back into the garage, see?
Yeah.
The van stops.
Yeah.
We fix the 2 men in it, fill up our car from the back, and bring the stuff back here to sort.
To sort? Oh, I like that. Yes. Here we can bring it through the back way. When do we do it?
Well, I think our most profitable haul will be tonight, Friday.
Well, what about a car?
Oh, you can leave that to me.
And Walter Piewski ran true to form. He wanted a fast car in a hurry. He applied the methods he knew. He worked the telephone trick on a young and trusting motor salesman who duly delivered a shining, high-powered limousine to a block of flats. As he disappeared into the entrance full of expectation, the Pike drove off rapidly to Braston Mews, where his partner was waiting for him. The timing was perfect. As the car stopped, the first post office van was already approaching.
Here, keep your head down, Ed. Here he comes. The second one won't be more than a minute or so behind. We must turn the car broadside onto it.
How did you get this barrow?
I'll tell you later. It's hand-picked, see? Plenty of room in the back for the luggage. There we are. Nothing can get by now.
What happens if something tries to get through before the van arrives?
We make way for it. It can come back another night if necessary. Here, what's this?
It's the van. We're going to be all right.
And nobody about. Couldn't be better. Now, get out.
Yeah?
Keep your chin tucked into your scarf like me.
Righto.
Pretend to be pushing the car.
Right.
What's up? Come down.
Oh,
afraid so.
Could you give us a push?
Sorry, mustn't leave the van.
Oh. Well, look, in that case, I wonder if you'd like to earn yourselves 10 bob, eh? If you could ring this number for us when you get to your own destination, it's my garage.
I'd log on and send a breakdown for you, eh?
That's the idea.
Oh, don't mind doing that for you. I'll do it for nothing.
Oh, thanks, Sam. You're very kind. If you got a pencil, I'll jot down my name. It's rather a difficult one.
Here, here's a pencil.
Help! Dirty thieves! Oh, that's got the both of them.
Good. We'll start getting the bags out, quick.
No, you don't.
I'll set you up, you snivelling idiot.
I'm choking. This scarf's choking me.
Here, quick with the bags, Ed.
Oh, no, here they come.
I'm going. You'll swing for it.
Start getting the stuff in the car.
Okay.
Right. Oh, I reckon that's about as much as we can take. Here. Oh, what's happened to the driver?
Oh, don't worry about him. Get moving.
Here, look at his tongue. His eyes. You've killed him.
Stop talking. Get on with the job.
There's a car coming. They've got us in their headlights. It's the cops.
Well, let's get out of here. Oh, tight on the corner.
Keep going, they're after us. Oh, watch the traffic lights. They're red. Something's coming.
Oh, we got through.
Oh, I thought we'd had it. Oh, the police car's held up by the other car.
But get away, Ed. We're going to make it.
Put them in! Slow up, we can't get round!
Ed Javison died in that crash, so mutilated that his body could not be identified. By some miracle, the Pike escaped and staggered away into the shadows. But his tartan scarf was still round the throat of his victim, lying in the mews. Now let Superintendent Brandreth take up the story of the hunt.
Well, the hunt was soon over. In fact, as soon as the car was reported stolen, I had a call from one of my inspectors.
I thought you'd like to see this.
What is it, Harrison? Oh, stolen car. Well?
Well, I've checked with criminal records, sir. There was something familiar about the method. Calling up a garage and getting the salesman to deliver the car to a block of flats. Now, here's the list of men who practiced that. Now, these two are inside at present.
Yes.
This one's going straight. Well, he's out of London anyway.
That leaves this one, Walter Pievsky.
Yes, sir. The Pike.
Know where to find him?
And he's sharing a place with a man named Javison in the East End.
Right. Bring him in.
Yes, sir.
But before the Pike was picked up for questioning about the car, his scarf was...
The car was immediately recognized as the one which we believe Pievsky had stolen. In theory, the evidence against him was already piling up. If he was the car thief, he was probably the murderer as well. But I needed that extra piece of evidence. I called for everything that was known about him, including the list of his personal property which he had signed in prison. It was a shot in the dark, but it yielded results.
There's no doubt about the scarf being his property, Superintendent, even to the patch on it.
Within 24 hours, the Pike was caught. Still dazed by the car crash, he offered no resistance. In due course, he was convicted of the murder of William Price, the driver of the post office van. And at 8 o'clock, one cold morning in February, he was hanged. All because of this tartan scarf, which has earned its place today in the Black Museum.
Orson Welles will be back with you in just a moment. Now here in person is Orson Welles.
Under English law, there are no degrees of murder, and the death sentence has to be pronounced on a man or woman convicted of the crime. Recommendations to mercy by the jury are always carefully considered. But in the case of Walter H. Piewski, no such recommendation was made. The evidence against him was unshakable, and on the eve of his execution he reproached himself bitterly, not for the death of his victim, or even his unfortunate partner, but for two other reasons. The supreme crime of murder had brought him no profit, and as his last hour approached, he became increasingly angry at his own forgetfulness. Oh yes, they usually overlook something. And that's why the faded piece of tartan has earned its place here among the other exhibits in the Black Museum. Now, until we meet again in the same place for another story about the Black Museum, I remain, as always, obediently yours.
The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles, is presented by arrangement with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Radio Attractions, with original music composed and conducted by Sidney Torch, produced by Harry Allen Towers.
Oh, Islington already? We're nearly there.
Yes, next stop, Holloway.
Oh, I hate women's prisons. Almost as much as I love women.
Yes, well, I should warn you, Joyce Wallace is a very pretty girl.
Huh?
Perhaps as well I shall be with you to give you moral support.
Thank you. I prefer to see her on my own.
Yeah, but she's bound to be shy about meeting you. Like Patrick Butler, K.C., known to his admirers as the great defender.
And known to others as that damned Irishman. No, I need to take her emotional temperature, so to speak. Give me 10 minutes alone with her.
All right, well, very well. But don't forget one important point.
What might that be?
The charge against her is murder.
We present Donald Sinden as Dr. Gideon Fell in Below Suspicion by John Dixon Carr.
Notes made by me, Gideon Fell, on November the 8th, 1937, concerning the murder of Mrs. Mildred Taylor. When Patrick Butler met Joyce Wallace, he saw I had not exaggerated. Although she was very frightened, she was also very attractive.
Who
you?
Please, don't be alarmed, Miss Wallace. My name is Patrick Butler. I shall be your counsel to defend you in court.
Oh, but there must be some mistake. I couldn't possibly. I mean, I haven't any money.
Oh, that doesn't matter at all. I'm here to help you. But if it makes you feel any better, I'll take my fee out of the next wealthy racketeer who really is guilty.
So you believe I didn't do it? Oh, you don't know how much that means to me. Thank you.
Just let me ask you a few questions. How old are you? How long had you been with Mrs. Taylor, that sort of thing?
I'm 28. I'd been with Mrs. Taylor for nearly 2 years as a sort of companion, secretary, nurse.
Nurse? Ah, yes. I gather she was a rich widow, nearly 70, and a bit of a hypochondriac.
Yes, she was always taking pills and patent medicines.
Living in Balham, in an old-fashioned house on the edge of the common. Were you the only other person who slept in the house?
Yes. She had a cook housekeeper, Alice Griffin, married to Bill Griffin, the coachman. They had the coach house at the back. When Mrs. Taylor wanted to go out, he drove her in the landau. There was a horse in the stable, and that's where... Oh.
You were about to say that's where the poison came from.
Bill had an old Epsom salts tin full of antimony in the stable. He said it kept the horse's coat nice and glossy.
Ah. And it does look very much like Epsom salts. A white, crystalline powder, soluble in water.
But I didn't kill her. I swear I didn't.
Of course not. Tell me everything you can remember. What happened on the afternoon before she died?
She had visitors. Mr. Renshaw, he's her nephew, and his wife, Lucia. They came to tea. I was quite surprised.
No? Why was that?
Well, they live in Hampstead on the other side of London. They didn't often venture as far as Balham.
Ah.
Anyway, they had tea, and I went to my room. About an hour later, the bell rang, and it went on ringing and ringing.
The doorbell?
No, there was an electric bell in my room, in case Mrs. Taylor needed me during the night. It's going to hang me.
No, I'm quite sure.
Please, let me finish. When I went to her room, the Renshaws had gone, and I found she was sitting up in bed, holding the bell push, the kind they have in hospitals, on a long cord. She'd gone into her bathroom and found her tin of Epsom salts was empty. She said it was my fault. By the time Alice came to fetch the tea things, Mrs. Taylor had worked herself up, screaming, "I know a young woman who'll get no bequest now. I'll ring my solicitor and make sure of that."
What bequest?
She'd left me £500 in her will. I know it's a lot of money, but please believe me. I'd never kill anyone, no matter how much.
I'm sure you wouldn't. And what happened after that?
She calmed down eventually. Alice made the supper and I remade the bed and settled her for the night. Then I went round the house, making sure the doors and windows were locked. I turned the key in the back door and went up to bed. I slept soundly, and I'm certain the bell in my room didn't ring. Only...
Go on.
Everyone thinks I'm lying. They say she must have rung the bell when that terrible pain began, but she didn't.
Yes, I know. Just tell me what happened next morning.
I got up at 8 as usual and went down to unlock the back door and let Alice in. Then, while I was getting washed and dressed, I heard the bell ringing. I thought it was Mrs. Taylor getting angry all over again, so I rushed to her room. Alice had the bell push. Mrs. Taylor was lying on her side in a tangle of bedclothes. Somehow I knew at once she was dead.
Please, tell me everything you can remember.
On the bedside table was a tumbler with a teaspoon in it, and some white sediment at the bottom of the glass. There was an open tin of Epsom salts. I found out later that Mrs. Taylor's fingerprints were on it, and so were mine.
And had you touched the tin?
Yes, I picked it up and looked inside. It was half full. I couldn't think where it had come from.
But Alice Griffin says she never saw you touch the tin.
She's mistaken. I know she wouldn't lie about a thing like that. But sometimes people forget.
Of course. In fact, you may have forgotten something yourself. When you went down and unlocked the back door to let her in, I feel sure the key wasn't in the lock.
I don't understand.
I think you found the key lying on the floor, and you had to pick it up to unlock the door. Am I right?
No. The key was where I left it, in the lock.
Think about it. I assure you, I am never wrong. I'll see you again in a day or two. Perhaps you'll remember it by then.
As arranged, Patrick came and joined me in a nearby pub, where there was a drink waiting for him.
Your very good health, Doctor.
And the continuing health of your client. What did you make of her? Do you believe she's innocent?
Do you want the truth, or the barrister's usual pretense?
The truth, naturally.
In that case, she's as guilty as hell.
Ah. You know, what makes you say that?
Partly the evidence, partly instinct. I always go by instinct. And I am never wrong. But don't worry, I prefer my clients to be guilty. Where's the fun in defending someone who's innocent? Besides, guilty or innocent, every person within the law is entitled to a defence.
An honest defence, not a faked one.
Put your mind at rest, Doctor. I promise you the jury will bring in a verdict of not guilty within 20 minutes.
The case had created some interest in the press, and courtroom number 1 at the Old Bailey was quite crowded when my colleague, Chief Superintendent Hadley, and I took our places. And Mr. Lowndes, the counsel for the prosecution, questioned his key witness, Mrs. Alice Griffin.
Mrs. Griffin, I understand that you and your husband occupy the coach house above the stable.
Yes, sir.
Was it your custom every morning at 8 a.m. to go from the coach house to the back door and be admitted by the prisoner who unlocked the door?
Yes, sir.
And she did so on the morning in question as usual?
Yes, sir. No, not exactly. It was a bit different.
Different?
Yes, sir. The key wasn't in the lock. It was lying on the mat inside. Joyce had to pick it up and put it in the lock to open the door.
Great Jupiter, does she realise what she's saying? I doubt it. Butler would prove that someone else could have entered the house with a spare key. No wonder he's smiling. And no wonder Mr. Lowndes looks thunderstruck.
Yes, well, why didn't you mention this earlier when you were questioned by the police?
Well, sir, nobody asked me. It's only when I thought about it since I remembered. I heard the key go into the lock. Besides, the door swung open during the night, and me and Bill, Mr. Griffin, we heard it bang. The wind caught it and slammed it shut. Shook the whole house, it did.
Hey, look at Butler. Now that surprised him. It did indeed. But after a moment of sheer astonishment, Patrick Butler, K.C., looked delighted. When he cross-examined the witness, he was still smiling.
Mrs. Griffin, you told the court Miss Wallace never touched the tin of Epsom salts in the bedroom at any time.
Well, that's right, sir. She didn't.
And you said that when you first entered Mrs. Taylor's bedroom, you thought that she had had a heart attack.
Oh, yes. I couldn't think of anything else.
And you weren't in any way suspicious of the Epsom salts tin on the table?
Well, no, sir. Why should I be? I hardly noticed it.
Quite so. You hardly noticed it. In fact, it would be untrue to say that you watched the tin carefully, wouldn't it?
I don't know what you mean.
Well, let me put it another way. Did you watch the tin?
No, sir.
So, from the moment Miss Wallace entered the room, could you swear she never once touched the tin containing antimony? Can you swear to that?
Well, no, sir. I'm not really that sure about it.
Not really sure? Let me ask you one more question. When you found the deceased and rang the bell to get help, was the bell push close to Mrs. Taylor's hand?
No, sir, it wasn't. Otherwise, when she was took bad, she'd have rung for Joyce, Miss Wallace, wouldn't she? Stands to reason.
So where exactly did you find the bell push?
Well, it was hanging down behind the bedhead. She must have been in such pain, she couldn't reach it, poor soul.
Thank you, Mrs. Griffin. I have no further questions.
Patrick had been over-optimistic when he prophesied that the jury would reach a verdict in 20 minutes. In the event, we had to wait for nearly 3/4 of an hour before they returned.
Members of the jury, are you agreed upon a verdict?
We are.
Do you find the prisoner, Joyce Leslie Wallace, guilty or not guilty of murder?
Not guilty.
Silence in court.
There's a particular coffee house almost opposite the Bailey, where all the lawyers go. And when Patrick called in half an hour later for some much-needed refreshment, Joyce was waiting for him.
I've been hoping I'd see you. I wanted to thank you.
Oh, there's really no need.
Please, I must. Thank you so much for rescuing me. Why are you smiling like that?
Tell me, what are your future plans?
I don't know. I haven't dared to think that far ahead.
You're out of a job now. You'll need money. Of course, there's the legacy from Mrs. Taylor.
I couldn't touch that. I'd see her face every time
Look here, Joyce. Let me help you. It's the least I can do.
No, please. I watched you in court. Sometimes I thought you believed me, but you were only acting. When I first met you, you tried to make me lie about the back door.
No. You heard Alice Griffin's testimony about it slamming. She heard that. She said so on oath.
It was probably next door. She made another mistake, that's all.
Oh, you should be grateful. Her evidence served you very well.
So you don't believe I'm innocent? You never did.
Let's be honest, shall we? I'll tell you exactly what I told Dr. Fell. You are as guilty as hell.
I worshipped you. I still do. But one day you're going to admit you were wrong. And for God's sake, don't say you're never wrong.
And with that, according to Patrick, she brushed past him and fled into the street. Meanwhile, Hadley, who had stopped off to telephone his office, joined me in the nearest pub.
Ah, you must be a mind reader. Cheers.
We can be thankful the case is over and Joyce Wallace is free.
Well, we're no nearer finding out who killed Mrs. Taylor. But I've just heard some startling news. Last night, while Joyce Wallace was still in custody, something else happened. You remember Mrs. Taylor's nephew, Dick Renshaw?
Yeah, of course. He and his wife were almost the last people to see Mrs. Taylor alive.
Yes. And Renshaw was poisoned last night.
What?
With another heavy dose of antimony.
Do the police suspect anyone?
Oh, yes. Mrs. Lucia Renshaw. They say the evidence looks fairly damning. But that's not the end of it. Apparently, in the past 3 months, there have been 9 unsolved deaths by poison in different parts of the country. And in not one of those cases has the Yard traced the purchase of poison to any suspects.
But what has this got to do with Mrs. Taylor's murder? And why is Mrs. Renshaw under suspicion?
It seems to have been a very unhappy marriage. And they say she's the only person who could have done it. I wonder who she'll get to defend her.
Good morning, Mrs. Renshaw.
Mr. Butler, how kind of you to come all this way.
Sorry I'm rather late, but I don't know Hampstead very well. Although, strangely enough, this house looked vaguely familiar. Almost as if I'd been here before.
Of course. You've been to Mrs. Taylor's in Balham. The 2 houses were built at the same time by Richard's great-grandfather in the 1870s. The same builder, the same architect, same doors and windows.
And the same locks, perhaps.
Possibly. I've really no idea. But what was I saying? Oh, yes. I wanted to apologise. I know I should have come to your chambers, but after everything that's happened, I really don't feel up to it. You must forgive me for entertaining you in my boudoir and in my dressing gown.
Believe me, I feel extremely honoured.
What nonsense. Now you've made me smile. Thank you. I haven't smiled much lately.
Of course. I was sorry to hear of your husband's death.
Yes. But I won't be a hypocrite. I must tell you, 2 nights ago, in this room, I asked Richard to give me a divorce. And an hour later, he was dead.
I see. Tell me about your husband. What was he like?
As a matter of fact, he wasn't unlike you. It's not just a slight physical resemblance, but your smile, your gestures, there are similarities.
Really? Let's talk about the night before last. Do you mind telling me, why did you want a divorce?
So many reasons. Of course, he was away from home a lot. He travelled a good deal on business, often for weeks at a time, but I was quite glad about that. And it's not because he'd been unfaithful. It was humiliating, but I'd almost got used to that too. No, we'd fallen out of love, and there was no future for us.
And when you asked for a divorce, what was his reaction?
He looked at me with absolute hatred. Then, without a word, he took a drink of water from that carafe on the table. It was a habit of his. Every night before he went to bed, he drank some water, straight from the carafe. Then he began to get undressed. He was very angry. He suddenly said, "Unless you can find evidence against me, which you can't, you'll never get a divorce. Remember what happened last time you tried it." A few minutes later, a strange look came over his face. He went into the bathroom and I heard him being violently ill. When he came back, he collapsed onto the bed. He looked ghastly. Then he said... I can't tell you what he said.
I'm afraid you must. It's very important.
Well, he said, "You've poisoned me, you bitch." Then he rolled over and I rang for the doctor, but it was too late.
It was antimony, I understand, in the water carafe.
Yes. The police were here for hours last night, asking questions, taking fingerprints. They seem to think I'm the only one who could have put it there. Can you help me?
I'll do more than that. I shall save you.
I believe you will.
Thank you, Mrs. Renshaw.
Do you think you could possibly call me Lucia?
Of course. I'd be happy to.
Oh, I'd forgotten. That will be Dr. Fell. He telephoned earlier to ask if he could have a few words with me. I'm afraid I said yes. I'd better make myself respectable. Could you be an angel and go down to make my apologies? Tell him I'll join you in a few minutes. Would you mind?
Not in the least. Dr. Fell and I are old friends.
My dear chap, this is a pleasant surprise.
I've been having a preliminary session with my client. She'll be down in a moment. Are you here officially on behalf of Superintendent Hadley?
Certainly not. At present, I'm in disgrace because I said that the trial of Joyce Wallace was a muddle from start to finish.
Because Lowndes didn't consider the evidence carefully.
Frankly, nobody considered the evidence carefully.
Oh? Not even the counsel for the defence?
No, not even the great defender. You were seeking a clever solution rather than the true explanation. Do you realize that there have been 9 unsolved poisoning cases recently?
Surely you don't think they're all connected?
Why, Thunder, I do. And all of them with just 2 aims in mind. Profit and pleasure.
You mean some kind of murder syndicate? Hired assassin?
No, nothing like that. But what sort of group could exist under cover and in silence? How could so many people obtain poison without leaving any record of the transaction? Oh, Lord. Oh, Bacchus.
What's the matter?
Oh, this candlestick. Just look at it.
What's wrong with it? A handsome silver candelabra with 7 candle holders.
Look inside the sockets.
They're black with dust. They need cleaning, that's all.
Perhaps. But what about the man who died in this house the night before last? The man who drank from a poisoned water carafe in the presence of his wife.
Who told you that?
I did, when he telephoned me. I'm so glad you know each other. I'm sure you'll both be able to help me.
And let me ask you, Mrs. Renshaw, do you have any antimony in your possession?
No, of course not.
Excellent. I'm confident I can get you acquitted.
And if you succeed? I'm sorry to have to say this, but the police might lay another charge against her.
What other charge?
The murder of Mrs. Mildred Taylor.
But that's ridiculous.
No, I'm afraid not. After Joyce Wallace, you were the principal suspect. As soon as she was acquitted, the police turned their attention to you.
What do you mean?
Mr. Butler proved that the locked house wasn't really locked. An outsider could have got in. And your husband was Mrs. Taylor's only relative. On his death, you became an heiress. You inherited Mrs. Taylor's house, the Priory, this house, Abbott's Lodge, and I understand there's a third property called the Chapel. Curious choice of names.
What are you saying? Surely you don't really think that
On the afternoon preceding Mrs. Taylor's death, you paid an unexpected call on her. That was when she mentioned her craving for Epsom salts and became angry because there were none in the house. Did you know about the antimony kept in the stable?
Don't answer
Of
that.
course I knew. Bill Griffin told everybody to warn them.
Yeah, we also know the back door key was not in the lock. As Mr. Butler pointed out, anyone with a spare key could have got in. It was a Grierson lock. Is there a Grierson lock to this house?
There might be. I've no idea.
And Bill Griffin testified that more than 4 tablespoons of antimony were taken from the tin, which is twice the amount Mrs. Taylor swallowed. The murderer was keeping another heavy dose in reserve.
Mrs. Renshaw, a little while ago you told me your husband said, "You'll never get a divorce. Remember what happened the last time you tried it." What did he mean by that?
I'd hired a firm of private detectives to follow him. A week later, they had to give up the case. One of their operatives was so badly beaten up, he finished up in hospital.
So you thought you'd never get free from your husband?
But if you're suggesting that
I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply putting the case against you as the police would see it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Listen, Lucia...
And thank you too, Mr. Butler. I'd be glad if you didn't interfere in my affairs any longer.
There isn't a shred of direct evidence. The case against you may look bad,
yes,
but
and
it's
who
not...
made it look so bad? Just get out, both of you. Get out of my house.
We left with as much dignity as we could muster. I expected Patrick to be angry, but he seemed rather preoccupied. The following morning, at his bachelor apartment in a cul-de-sac off Pall Mall, he had 2 callers. The first by telephone.
Patrick Butler?
Oh, Patrick, can you forgive me?
Lucia, I was just thinking of ringing you to apologise.
But you did nothing wrong. I was a beast and an ungrateful wretch.
Don't say another word. Naturally, you're upset.
Yes, I was, but how can I ever make it up to you?
Very easily. You can have lunch with me today.
Oh, I can't. Well, I shouldn't so soon after Richard's death.
Meet me in the restaurant at the Royal Park Hotel at 1 o'clock, please.
Well, perhaps I could.
Thank you. And one more thing. That firm of private detectives you mentioned, I'd like very much to have a word with them. Can you give me their name and address?
I don't remember the address. It's somewhere off Shaftesbury Avenue, but the name is Smith and Smith. Discretion guaranteed. You'll find it in the phone book.
Oh, damn, it's someone at the door. The postman, probably. I'll have to go. Don't forget, the Royal Park, 1 o'clock. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, yes, so am I.
But when Patrick opened the front door, it wasn't the postman.
Good morning.
Miss Wallace?
May I come in?
Well, as a matter of fact, I was...
Thank you. I expect I'm being a nuisance, but this really is important. Through here. Oh, what a lovely room. It's like a library.
Would you mind telling me what this is all about?
In last night's paper, I read about Mr. Renshaw being poisoned. Are you going to defend Mrs. Renshaw?
Well, yes, but
I thought so. And I believe I can help you.
How do you propose to do that?
You want to know the motive for those 2 murders?
Of course, but I don't see what...
I worked for Mrs. Taylor for nearly 2 years, and I couldn't help noticing things, little things. You see, Mr. Butler, your trouble is you're not very observant.
Oh, really?
Really. Of course you see things, but you don't always understand what you see, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I think so. But I can only say that no one else has ever accused me of being unobservant.
It might have been better if they had. And another thing.
Thank you. I really don't have time
This case involves women. That's where I have the advantage over you. You don't really understand women, do you?
What?
It's only my opinion, of course, but I feel
I'm
sure
afraid
that...
your opinion really doesn't interest me.
I see. I'm just wasting my breath, am I?
You're also wasting my time. And I do have a number of appointments this morning, so...
I don't know why I bothered. You needn't see me out. I know the way.
Look, perhaps some other time we could have dinner one evening.
You won't see me again, Mr. Butler, until I can tell you the name of the real murderer.
Oh, you think you'll find a solution before I do?
I can try. Good morning.
At lunchtime, Lucia Renshaw met Patrick at the restaurant. But her mood had changed.
I keep thinking about Dr. Fell. Those strange questions he asked me last night. About the poison and the keys.
Oh, yes. He got quite excited about the candelabra in your drawing room. Said it needed cleaning.
Oh, what nonsense. My maid polishes it regularly. She keeps it spotless.
Never mind. I've 2 pieces of good news for you. One, you're having dinner with me tonight.
Oh, but you've just given me this wonderful lunch.
Oh, this place is too crowded. I want to take you somewhere quiet. How about it?
I'd love to, but I was hoping I might take you somewhere this evening. Somewhere interesting.
Oh, where's that?
I warn you, it's quite a long way off. We'll need a taxi.
No, we won't. I'll bring the car to Hampstead. What time?
Shall we say 8 o'clock? Oh, did you say there was another piece of good news?
Yes, I know how to prove you're innocent.
I wish you'd tell me about that, Mr. Butler.
Oh, you made me jump.
Lucia, may I introduce Chief Superintendent Hadley?
Mrs. Renshaw and I have already met. Madam?
Good afternoon, Mr. Hadley.
You surprised me, Superintendent. I didn't realize a man in your position would descend to following suspects.
Oh, I'm not on duty. I was lunching here myself, as it happens. May I join you?
Please. After all, we're all working together, aren't we, to get to the truth? According to Dr. Fell, there's some kind of murder organization which operates with poison and never leaves a single clue.
Could you lower your voice a little? We don't want to attract attention.
And I think I can tell you who was the head of the whole system.
Oh, yes. So who is it?
I said was the head. The chief organizer, who was poisoned so someone else could take his place, was Richard Renshaw.
Oh, I'm sorry. So clumsy of me. But Richard, a criminal? I can't believe that.
Exactly, which is why Dr. Fell asked Mrs. Renshaw a lot of bizarre questions last night to prove that she knew nothing about it. But now you only have to find out who's taken Richard's place as the head of the murder gang, and we'll have our poisoner. What do you say, Superintendent?
We collect information, Mr. Butler. We don't distribute it. But I'll tell you this much. Renshaw kept 3 separate bank accounts in 3 different names. It seems you could become a very rich woman, Mrs. Renshaw, provided Mr. Butler can prove your innocence.
Oh, for pity's sake, you've only got to follow up the lead I've just given you.
And how do you suggest we should set about that?
There's a firm called Smith & Smith, a detective agency. One of their men was beaten up by some thugs, clearly hired by Renshaw. Find out who was involved, follow the trail back, and you'll uncover the murder club.
Oddly enough, we already tried that. But Smith & Smith, whose real name is Luke Parsons, won't talk. We couldn't get a word out of him.
Do you want to bet I can't? I've had a good deal of professional experience with villains, Superintendent.
Oh, yes. And when were you last in a rough house?
Patrick, no, be
Thanks
sensible.
for your concern, Hadley, but I'll worry about that when the time comes. More coffee, Lucia?
An hour later, Patrick climbed 2 dingy flights of stairs in a Soho back street and entered the office of Mr. Luke Parsons.
Mr. Parsons, I'd like to have a few words with you on a rather
Didn't my secretary tell you I don't see anyone without an appointment?
Yes, she did mention something of the sort. But I said I was sure he'd want to see me. My name's Renshaw.
Oh, my God.
What's the matter? Oh, you didn't mistake me for my brother, did you? He died 2 days ago, poor chap. I've been living in the States for the past few years, but as soon as I heard of his death, I took the first plane over.
Well, you do look a little bit like him. But I didn't even know he had a brother. In the States, you say? Lucky man. Now, that's a place where firms like mine have got rights. How do the police treat private investigators over here? Like dirt, that's how.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I have a little business of a strictly private nature.
Oh, my dear sir, sit down. Look, make yourself comfortable. If you just give me the facts.
Well, it's rather hard to know where to begin.
Yeah, it generally is. There's a lady involved, perhaps.
In a way, yes.
Very understandable. But you know our motto, discretion guaranteed. Just look on me as a sympathetic friend, yes?
I'll try. The fact is, I run quite a flourishing business in the States.
Oh, yes, yeah. May I make so bold as to ask the nature of it?
It's the same business Dick directed over here. Except I like to think our cloak is better organised.
Excuse me, I don't want nothing to do with that.
No, I don't want to involve you in my business. But, you may remember some time ago my brother had a little problem concerning his wife.
Oh? Did he?
Dick got a couple of enterprising lads to, what shall I say, get to work on one of your staff. I want to find those 2 lads and take them back to the States, that's all.
Sorry, don't know nothing about that, can't help you.
It would be worth your while. Would £100 help to persuade you?
I could tell you where you might find 2 certain people. I can't promise anything. But I need your assurance that my name would never be mentioned.
What do you take me for? There you are. Now tell me their names.
I can only give you one of the names. Henry Lord. You'll most likely find him at the pool hall in Bellman's Yard off of Dean Street. Not a word to anyone, mind.
Bellman's Yard was at the heart of Soho, the wicked square mile. Behind an iron railing and down 3 steps in a shallow area, there was a grimy window with the word billiards in enamel letters. A few men were playing pool. One looked up as Patrick entered.
Hello. Do I know you?
I don't think so. My name's Renshaw. Bob Renshaw. I believe my brother used to come here sometimes, and I was hoping I might meet a friend of his, Henry Lord.
Sorry, he's not here. But I've sort of took his place, and you're welcome to stay in case he turns up. How about a game while you wait?
I don't know much about pool. I've played snooker.
Oh, you'll soon pick it up. Here, take my cue. Getting a bit of practice.
Thank you.
Very aware that he was being watched, Patrick obeyed. He wasn't trying to play, just potting at anything on the table. Slowly, he became aware of a silence behind him. The room had emptied. Looking back, he saw he was almost alone, except for the man who had spoken to him and one other, raw-boned and with a broken nose and built like a prize-fighter. When he spoke, Patrick saw he had 2 gold teeth, which gleamed under the lights.
He ain't much good at that game, is he, Henry?
Nah, he's not much good.
I mean, he ain't no good at that game at all.
I think you must be the 2 men I was hoping to see.
He says he wants to see us, Henry. Now, why would he want to do that?
I reckon we better find out.
As he spoke, Henry drew a heavy pair of brass knuckles from his pocket, fitting them on his right hand.
I wonder what he'd do if you was to stroke him with those.
I don't expect he'd like it.
Nah, but he couldn't do nothing about it, could he?
Fear crawled through Patrick Butler. He studied the balls on the pool table, but with a throw of, say, 25 feet, they could smash a skull to pulp.
We don't want him to start calling us names, do we?
I don't think he'll be able to call us names. But what do you think he might call us, if he could still talk?
I'd call you a pair of bastards. What do you propose to do about that?
You're going to get it now, all right.
Patrick's arm whipped forward, and he threw to kill. The ball struck the man's shoulder and spun him sideways, falling back into the rack of cubes. For several seconds, Patrick fired at the thugs as fast as he could snatch up the pool balls, yellow, red, and blue missiles streaking across the room. Then he made a dive for the door and escaped. At 8 o'clock that evening, he collected Lucia, and as they drove across the river into South London, he gave her a brief outline of his adventures at the pool hall. He felt he should warn her about the kind of people they were up against.
Oh, Patrick, suppose they come after you. Next time you could be badly hurt.
Don't worry. I rang Hadley with a description of both men. He'll have them in for questioning by now, and he'll beaver away until he finds out who's running this murder club.
Do you think those thugs know who's running it? Do we even know if it really exists?
Thanks to a rat-faced man called Luke Parsons, I believe they were expecting me at the pool hall.
But why would he let 2 criminals know he's just betrayed them? He'd never do that.
No, but he might have warned the head of the murder club, whoever he is, and he might have warned the thugs.
Oh, I wish you'd never got involved in this. If anything happened to you...
Nothing's going to happen to me. Let's change the subject. Where's this special place we're going to? What's so special about it?
It's called the Chapel. Not far from the Priory, where Mrs. Taylor lived.
Ah, yes, the 3rd house. Who lives there?
Nobody. And it isn't a house. You'll see.
Oh, I recognise this. Isn't this the road?
Yes, that's the Priory, on the right. Oh, what's the matter? Why are we stopping?
Well, there's no one living in the house now, is there?
No, of course not.
I saw a light in the 1st floor window. There it is again.
But who on earth... Oh, Patrick, I'm frightened.
I'm going to find out what's going on. Stay here.
No, I'm not staying in the car by myself. I'm coming with you. This is the drawing room. There's no sign of anyone. Perhaps it was a trick of the light. The headlamps reflected on the window. Something like that.
No, I saw a light moving around. Probably a torch. Please, Lucia, I wish you'd go back to the car.
I wish you'd stop all this detective nonsense.
And I wish you both clear out and leave me in peace.
Doctor, what the devil are you doing here?
An apt choice of words. I came here to investigate, and my investigation has already uncovered some devilish secrets.
If I may say so, your cryptic remarks sometimes sound very much like sheer hocus-pocus. I don't suppose you're going to tell us what you found.
Certainly I am. I searched Mrs. Taylor's dressing table and found 2 very interesting items. A silver cross on a chain and a pair of garters.
Now I know you're teasing us. Women don't wear garters nowadays, or so I'm told. Do they, Lucia?
Oh, I know Aunt Mildred was a little old-fashioned, but no, I don't think so.
Perhaps I should add that there was something strange about both these items. The cross was hanging upside down on its chain, and the garters were bright scarlet.
And does that bring us any closer to the murder club and the person who runs it?
Oh, yes.
Will you tell us how?
I can and will. You deserve to know the deadliness of the enemy you're fighting. Oh, by the way, Hadley told me about your escapade this afternoon. But I'm afraid the police raid on the pool hall was a fiasco.
What do you mean?
One of your adversaries, Henry Lord, is now in hospital with a fractured shoulder. But the other, George Grice, known as Goldie because of his gold teeth, Got away before the squad car arrived and is still at large. Do you have a firearms license?
No.
Is well, you should. Hadley can arrange that for you.
Do you really think I'd waste a bullet on a thug like that?
Oh, for pity's sake, be sensible. This afternoon, Goldie thought you were a fool. But he doesn't think so now. He won't give you a chance. He'll sneak up on you when you least expect it.
He might be looking for you now, at this very moment.
What if he is? Doctor, are you or are you not going to tell us what you know about the murder club? I take it this gang have developed some new kind of racket.
Well, it isn't new. This cloak for devilry, which you call a racket, is as old as sin. Ever since the Middle Ages, the red garter has been the badge of the witch, the worshipper of Satan.
Well, you're not suggesting Mrs. Taylor was the leader of some kind
She
of...
also wore an inverted cross, another mark of Satanism. No, she was not the leader, but she was very close to him. Tell me, Mrs. Renshaw, did you never suspect that your husband was the head of a witch cult?
Not until lunchtime today, when Mr. Butler started to explain. I knew he had some strange secret, but I never dreamed... witchcraft and Satan, nowadays.
Nowadays, more than ever. Because the world is in chaos, this evil flourishes. Doubly dangerous, since it attracts not only morbid sensation seekers, but also potential murderers.
Murderers?
Of course. The witch cult has always been the cloak for the wholesale poisoner. Last night at your house, I talked about an organization which distributed poison. But I couldn't think how it worked so successfully undercover. And there and then, in your drawing room, I saw a large silver candelabra. And I understood.
You pointed out that it needed dusting. The candle holders were black.
Yes, black, with wax, my friend, not with dust. Wax from black candles to celebrate a black mass. Not at this house, but in a building not far from here. A building that now belongs to you, Mrs. Renshaw.
The chapel. I knew Richard visited it sometimes. That's why I wanted to take you there, Pat. I was too scared to go on my own.
We were on our way there when we saw your light in the window.
Splendid. I've already arranged to meet Hadley at the chapel. You can give me a lift. He must be here already.
Unless someone else has a key.
Yes, when I have a torch, I'll lead the way.
Oh, it's quite an ordinary chapel. Some of the pews are broken and it needs cleaning, but otherwise it's just ordinary.
It may appear to be ordinary, but we are looking for extraordinary evidence. You see, now imagine you're a member of the cult, a hen-picked husband who wishes his wife dead, and you come here to achieve your heart's desire. Now, you go to a city where you're unknown, let's say Bristol. You're given the address of a certain chemist who sells you a poison called aconitine. You return home, and after a suitable interval, your wife is poisoned.
With aconitine?
No. She's poisoned with arsenic. Previously, a desperate woman from Birmingham bought arsenic in Leeds, and at the next meeting, these purchases were exchanged. So when your wife dies of arsenic in London, how could anyone trace it to you? Buying aconitine in Bristol.
So that's the ingenious new device.
New? My dear sir, it was used by a Satanist cult in 1746.
But what are you looking for here?
Records, dates, names, addresses.
You think those records exist?
Richard Renshaw was running a very complex organization. He must have had enough records to fill a filing cabinet. Hadley's men searched your house, Mrs. Renshaw, and your husband's office in the city, without success. So we reached the conclusion that the paperwork must be here.
In this chapel? But there's nowhere to... Oh!
I thought I heard voices. Come down here and see for yourselves.
Just ahead of us, a section of the floor had opened up, and Hadley's head and shoulders emerged through a large trapdoor. We followed him down some wooden steps, with some difficulty on my part, and found ourselves in the crypt, a very different place of worship.
There's a strange smell.
Incense. Something else I can't quite...
Marijuana. A drug used to remove inhibitions.
No, it's something more mundane than that.
I know what it is. It's paraffin oil, isn't it?
There's probably a stove somewhere to keep the place warm.
What are those two boxes side by side, almost like telephone kiosks?
Looks very much like a confessional.
Yes, except the worshippers don't come here to confess their sins. They come to confess their desires and have them granted. At a price.
We can't waste time talking. We've got to examine every inch of this place to find those confounded records.
The low roof, held up by a dozen pillars, was dimly lit by a single electric globe, which gave just enough light to reveal the heavy curtains that covered the walls, and at the far end, a statue of Satan on the altar, and a silver candelabra holding 7 black candles.
Look, it's exactly like mine.
We're going to need all the light we can get. Has anyone got a match?
Here you are.
Thanks.
Where do we start our search? How about behind those curtains? There could be a cupboard hidden away.
No, nothing but the walls. Solid concrete. But the papers have got to be here somewhere.
For my money, I'd say they're probably inside the confessional box.
Well, any luck?
No, nothing here but a hassock to kneel on, and the grill you whisper through to whoever's on the other side.
There are all these cushions on the floor. The papers could be hidden in there. Inside the cushion covers, perhaps.
Good idea. Lucky I've got a penknife.
We worked hard, but as midnight approached, our task seemed to be hopeless. We were tired, dusty, and we had found nothing at all.
It's no good. The records aren't here. They ought to be, but they aren't.
What was that?
What was what?
A shadow. I saw it in the corner of my eye. It seemed to vanish behind one of those pillars. It's gone now.
Look, there's no one else here. The candles are throwing our own shadows onto the curtains. No, I'm afraid we must admit defeat and get some fresh air.
Oh, please. I hate all this black magic. Let's go.
Did you say magic?
Yes, why?
Listen. You 3 go on up. Wait for me in the car. I'll join you in exactly 3 minutes.
What's wrong? Why do you want to stay down here?
Because I know where the papers are hidden. Now, it's my turn for the little hocus-pocus. I promise to put those papers in your hands in 3 minutes, all right?
Patrick told me later that it was the word magic that sparked him off. It suddenly struck him that the confessional box looked rather like the magic cabinets used by conjurers. Inside the box, he discovered the ceiling was made of plywood, and as he ran his fingers round the edge, it dropped down. But there was nothing inside. And at that moment, through the mesh of the grill, he saw the gleam of gold teeth.
You're too late, mister. I've been there already. Is this what you were looking for?
Hand them over.
Come and get them. Right!
Patrick burst out of the confessional like a jack-in-the-box, but Goldie was equally quick on his feet, and as they stood face to face, his teeth gleamed in a reminiscent smile.
You knocked me down.
I did, and I'm ready to do it again.
But you done it like an amateur. You never done much fighting, did you, mister?
No, I never bothered to learn.
Never bothered. Don't worry, I'll learn you all right.
Fine. What are you waiting for?
And with that, Patrick launched himself at Goldie, leading with a right hook that would have been murderous if it had landed. For the next few minutes, he seemed to become a punch bag. As he fell, he was vaguely aware that he had knocked over the candelabra. Coloured lights exploded around him. Or were those tongues of flame licking along the edge of the curtains?
Blimey, look out!
Put your hands up, you!
Come off it, we can't stay here.
Why not?
Because we'll be burned alive, that's why. We've got to get out.
You're not leaving here till you give me those papers.
And that was when the paraffin vapour went up in a sheet of flame. Goldie tried to make a dash for the stairs, but Patrick was too quick for him.
You balmy! Get your hands off me!
Give me those papers and I'll let you go.
Here, take your bleeding papers.
All right. You fought fair. Withdraw all charges. Go on.
Goldie stumbled up the stairs, and Patrick grabbed the scattered papers from the carpet as the flames crept closer. Then, choking in the thick smoke, he too made his escape. Next day, Patrick cancelled all his appointments, and when I called on him that evening, he was still bearing some signs of the punishment he'd taken.
Please, sit down. Make yourself comfortable.
Thank you. And are you fairly comfortable?
Frankly, no. It even hurts me to talk.
Oh, cheer up. I'm sure nothing will ever stop you talking. Have you spoken to Mrs. Renshaw today?
No, not yet.
Yeah, but my dear chap, she'll be so worried. You were in a terrible state when she last saw you.
What do you mean by that?
Oh, we've been sitting in the car waiting for you. We didn't know what was going on in the crypt. Suddenly, a smoky-faced man staggered out of the chapel and ran off down the road. A few minutes later, you appeared, handed me a bundle of papers, made an elaborate apology for keeping us waiting more than 3 minutes, then collapsed in a dead faint. I have never fainted in my life. Well, let's say that you were momentarily indisposed. Mrs. Renshaw took one look at you and the papers, then got out of the car and walked off into the night. I haven't seen her since. Finally, I understand from Hadley that you do not wish to prefer charges against your assailant, Mrs.
Goldie, George Grice.
Yes. I just found this piece of paper stuck to the windscreen of your car. I don't know how long it had been there. All day, I imagine.
You and me haven't finished yet. G.G.
Incidentally, have you seen the evening paper?
No, why?
A private inquiry agent found strangled. Shortly after 6 o'clock last night, the body of Mr. Luke Parsons was found by a charwoman cleaning the detective agency offices. The victim, who had been first stunned by a blow to the head, was found seated at his desk, strangled with a scarlet cord looped round his neck and slowly tightened.
I see. So this is the showdown, the third and final round.
Did you do as I suggested? Get yourself a gun?
No, and I shan't.
But don't you understand you now have two sets of enemies? Goldie and his cronies, perhaps, and the new leader of the witch cult. Don't you see that?
I see we now have 3 murders and 1 murderer.
There are also 3 servants. One is Alice Griffin, Mrs. Taylor's housekeeper. The second is Joyce Wallace, Mrs. Taylor's companion nurse secretary. Now, I know Alice Griffin was telling the truth, and I know Joyce Wallace did not kill Mrs. Taylor. But we all overlooked Mrs. Renshaw's servant, a girl called Kitty Owen, who was responsible for cleaning the candelabra, a conventional domestic. And as such, she was below suspicion.
Below suspicion? What do you mean by that?
In a detective story, no one is above suspicion, but certain people are assumed to be below it. Any minor role, like a servant, is merely a cardboard character, which is what misled us all. May I try to explain?
I should be extremely grateful.
The explanation took quite a while. By the time I'd finished, it was dark outside, and I suggested we should close the curtains in case of any passers-by.
This is a cul-de-sac. We don't have any passers-by. Or were you thinking of an uninvited guest?
The documents you found last night proved without any question that Renshaw was the former head of the cult and Mrs. Taylor the second in command, with a third person to assist both of them. Therefore, I think...
Forgive me, but it's getting late. If you'll excuse me.
Very well. I shall take my leave of you.
And I shall see you out.
When he opened the front door, the little cul-de-sac seemed very dark. It was impossible to tell who might be lurking in the shadows.
I'll walk to the end with you. You'll be able to pick up a cab pretty easily.
Oh, I'm sure I shall. Oh, I found this book at Mrs. Taylor's on the history of witchcraft. It might interest you.
Thank you. I wonder if her spirit is hovering tonight.
I don't know. But I think someone else may be.
Then you'd better not hang about. Get home safely.
I shall say good night to you, sir. To a man whom, despite certain eccentricities, I admire very much.
Good night, Doctor. If you're there, if you can hear me, why don't you come out of the shadows and face me?
But no one answered him. Taking a last look round, Patrick returned to his flat. As he entered his study, he realized he had been foolish to leave the front door open. When he caught the whiff of perfume, he knew he was not alone.
Good evening.
Good evening, Miss Wallace.
The last time we met, you called me Joyce.
Last time we met, you said I wouldn't see you again until you could prove the identity of the murderer.
And now I've brought you my proof. I didn't poison Mrs. Taylor. I can prove that now.
Oh, I know that, my dear. It was an accident, wasn't it? But what else have you got to tell me?
I killed Dick Renshaw. I am the head of the witch cult.
Yes, I knew that too.
Oh, yes. I'm sure you did. May I sit down?
Why don't we both sit down? That's better. Shall I tell you what happened on the night Mrs. Taylor died? You went to Hampstead to poison your lover, Dick Renshaw.
Oh? And why would I do a dreadful thing like that?
Because he'd thrown you over, as he'd thrown over so many women. And once he was dead, you would take control of the witch cult. It was highly profitable. You already had an informer in the Renshaw household, the maid, Kitty Owen, who tipped you off about everything that went on there. You knew Dick was away on business, and Lucia was out to dinner with friends. So Kitty let you in, and you poisoned his water carafe. That was your little secret, and it nearly hanged you for the wrong death.
Go on.
When you left Mrs. Taylor's house, you dared not use the back door. The Griffins lived at the back, and they might have seen you, so you went out by the front door. And when you returned, you carelessly let it slam. It was the front door the Griffins heard. You also forgot to replace the key in the back door. Am I right so far?
Oh, please don't stop. This is fascinating.
But while you were out, Mrs. Taylor had been fretting and fuming about her Epsom salts. She couldn't sleep, so she got up and went to your room, where she found the Epsom salts tin, which contained antimony. It must have been quite a shock when you returned and found her dead.
Yes, a horrible shock.
And you realised, with Mrs. Taylor out of the way and Renshaw due to die when he returned from his travels, you'd achieved your heart's desire. And then you were arrested for a murder you hadn't committed. I imagine that before they took you away, you must have telephoned your helpful friend, Kitty.
Of course. At first, she absolutely adored Dick Renshaw. But when he chucked her as well, she soon changed her mind. I told her, whatever happened, she mustn't touch the water carafe.
So she was, in effect, your accomplice. As for you, I was right when I said you were as guilty as hell.
Yes. And you attracted me like hell. I hope you knew that.
You were cleared in court for murdering Mrs. Taylor, and it seemed you couldn't possibly be responsible for Renshaw's death, since you were still in custody when it happened. But when you left the courtroom, free at last, I suppose you got in touch with Luke Parsons and Goldie.
Oh, you mean George? I phoned them both, of course.
And after I called on Parsons and he told me where to find Goldie, no doubt he rang you, and you killed him.
A man who betrays you in the smallest thing will betray you in everything. It had to be done, just like Goldie.
What do you mean?
I was very angry when he let you have those papers. I gave him this address. I made him stick that note on your car. Then I gave him a revolver and told him to finish you off properly this time. But he wouldn't do it.
What?
That made me furious. He kept saying things like, he said I fought fair. He said he wouldn't make no charges against me, and he kept his word. I won't do it. So, naturally, he had to die. Darling, what's wrong?
You are what is wrong. Through and through. If he were alive, I'd be proud to shake his hand, and you had him killed?
Oh, no. I shot him myself. He wouldn't use the gun, so it seemed like poetic justice.
You'll soon find out what justice is. Do you suppose I'm the only one who knows the evidence against you? Dr. Fell knows. Superintendent Hadley knows. I don't have your precious papers. Scotland Yard has those. Kitty Owen will be taken in for questioning, and you will be taken back to Holloway. And there you will hang.
I don't think so. Don't move. You see, I still have the gun. So, you knew I was a murderer. All the time.
As I believe I mentioned, I am never wrong.
My dear Patrick, now that the trial of Joyce Wallace is over, I venture to answer your letter. The girl is a fanatic, and I think the jury realized that. I believe the verdict of guilty but insane was both merciful and sensible. I do wish to congratulate you on your engagement to Lucia Renshaw. She is as charming as you are gallant, and I'm sure that you will both be very happy. You should be grateful to gallantry, my dear fellow. After all, if you had not bowed gracefully to Joyce Wallace when she fired at you, that bullet would have entered your heart instead of striking your collarbone. That you will live a long while to enliven this dull world is the hope of yours sincerely, Gideon Fell.
In Below Suspicion by John Dixon Carr, Dr. Gideon Fell was played by Donald Sinden. Chief Superintendent Hadley, John Hartley. Patrick Butler, James Fleet. Joyce Wallace, Connie Walker. Lucia Renshaw, Becky Hindley. Alice Griffin, Richenda Carey. Luke Parsons, Terence Edmund. Henry Lord, Mark Holloway. George Goldie Grice, Christopher Brennan. Other parts were played by members of the cast. Below Suspicion was dramatized for radio by Peter Ling and directed by Enid Williams.
Rumpole and the Primrose Path by John Mortimer, with Timothy West as Horace Rumpole and Prunella Scales as his wife, Hilda.
Now we are all assembled, with one important exception, of course, I would like, as head of chambers, to introduce you all to our new head of marketing and administration, Lucy Gribble, who will, from now on, be in charge of improving the image of Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Ballard QC. Thank you indeed for that kind introduction. Just a scrap of detail to kick off with. I spell my first name Lucy with an I and not a Y.
Whatever for?
It makes, I feel, for a snappier image.
Ah.
Now, Mr. Ballard QC, I address you as chair of this meeting.
What did she say?
She called me chair.
Made you sound like an article of furniture.
Oh, do be quiet, Erskine Brown. Lucy Gribble has an important message for all of us.
Oh, very well.
What we have to demonstrate is that barristers have outsized hearts. And now we have a situation, sad as I'm sure we all agree it may be, which gives us the opportunity to show that we do care. So much so that we should all join in a very public display of heartfelt thanks.
Heartfelt thanks for what?
Heartfelt thanks for the life of one of our number. Horace Rumpole was an ordinary workaday barrister, an old war horse, one who didn't profess to legal brilliance, but one who cared deeply, and one we loved as a fellow member of Equity Court. By this act, we shall show that barristers have hearts.
By what act is that exactly?
The memorial service in the Temple Church for the late Horace Rumpole, barrister at law.
Isn't that a little premature? I notice that no one's yet announced Rumpole's death.
Well, let us not forget that after the heart attack brought about by an almighty row with Judge Bullingham at the Old Bailey, Mrs. Rumpole tells me that he's been removed from his London hospital, no doubt as a hopeless case, to the Primrose Path nursing home in Sussex. Hilda Rumpole was trying to put a brave face on it, but she admitted that Horace would be away from Chambers for a very, very long time indeed. And one knows, doesn't one, what places like the Primrose Path are like? The truth of it is that not many people come out of them alive.
Then I suggest, Chair, we go full speed ahead with the memorial.
We'll need to put together a programme, and we can hardly ask Mrs. Rumpole for her help. As yet.
I have an aunt in Godalming. I can call in on Rumpole when I go down to see her next. See how the land lies.
And I'm sure your visit, Erskine Brown, will be a welcome treat for Rumpole.
Whoever had christened this place of eternal rest the Primrose Path betrayed insufficient knowledge of English literature. According to Ophelia in Hamlet, it's the path of dalliance, and dalliance in the home was confined strictly to the television. The porter in Macbeth, however, said the Primrose Way led to the everlasting bonfire. This may have been a more accurate description. The inhabitants of the rooms down the corridor were given to disappearing quietly during the night, and leaving the Primrose Path, I felt sure, for the nearest crematorium. It was no particular treat to encounter Claude Erskine Brown in my room at the Primrose Path nursing home.
What's your favourite music, Rumpole?
Music, Erskine Brown?
We know you're absurdly prejudiced against Wagner. Tell me, when you sing to yourself, what do you sing?
Sometimes Pop Goes the Weasel, Occasionally knock 'em in the old Kent Road. More often than not a ballad of the war years. There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. You remember that?
No, I'm afraid I don't. Tell me, Rumpole, talking of the war years, did you ever serve your country overseas?
Oh, yes, I flew Spitfires in the war. I shot down the Red Baron and was the first British pilot to enter Berlin.
Try to be serious, Rumpole. I only ask because Ballard wants material for his speech.
His speech about me?
About your life. To give thanks for your existence. We shall celebrate you, Rumpole.
You mean at a Chambers piss-up in Pomeroy's wine bar?
Not exactly that, Rumpole. No. Anyway, I'd better be getting back. I've got a rating appeal tomorrow.
I envy you, Erskine Brown. You seem to lead a life of perpetual excitement.
Yo, there's just one more thing. Do you have a favourite prayer?
I pray to God to be left alone so I can get out of here as quickly as possible. It's all far too clean for my liking.
I'm sure they'll look after you extremely well here, Rumpole. For as long as you have left.
An hour later, I was woken from my doze by the sound of a woman sobbing. I moved, as quietly as I could manage it, into the corridor. At the end of the passage, with its linoleum shining like polished shoes, a woman was crying as she watered a bowl of hyacinths. She was Nurse Albright, my favourite member of staff, known to me as Dotty Dorothy. We would sing together songs we both loved, such as Night and Day, That Old Black Magic, and They Can't Take That Away From Me, which I danced to in the far distant time before Hilda's and my foxtrotting days were over.
Go back to your room, Mr. Rumpole, before Sister Sheila sees you.
Never mind about Sister Sheila. I've grown impervious to the icy disapproval of the head colonel. Come into my room, Dotty. Dotty's singing, her therapeutic use of herbs, and on many occasions her kindness, got her into frequent trouble with her boss, Sister Sheila Bradwell, who ruled the Primrose Path with the kind of enlightened and liberal principles which guided Captain Bligh when he was in charge of the Bounty. Now then, tell me what's the matter.
A terrible night, Mr. Rumpole. It's been the most ghastly night ever at the Primrose Path.
Tell me what happened.
Oh, poor Mr. Fairweather. He passed away during the night. They took him away. It was my night off, and they took him away without even telling me.
Freddie Fairweather was recovering, Dotty told me, from a massive heart attack. And she brought him herbal remedies to cheer him, and in return he made jokes and flirtatious suggestions.
I always said you and Freddie were my favourite patients. You won't believe what they've done to him.
What exactly?
Well, Sister let them take him away without even a chance of saying goodbye. Freddie would have hated that. He was full of rude suggestions, of course he was. He was a bit of a Jack the lad, we know that, even in his condition of health. But underneath all that, he had the most perfect manners. He'd have liked me to be there to hold his hand and say goodbye before they took him. But she wouldn't have that. She has to know best always.
We've got judges like that down the Old Bailey.
I hate to say this to you, Mr. Rumpole, but there's just no organisation in this place. It's all rules and no practice. You know what else happened last night?
Sister Sheila's Pekingese has done a runner?
No such luck. It was a patient called Mr. Masklin.
I don't know him.
No one seemed to. He was transferred here because they couldn't find a hospital bed for him. A pain in the neck, quite frankly, always complaining. Well, he has been very ill. But it seems last night he just got off his bed and walked straight out of the front door. I don't suppose we'll miss him, filthy-tempered man, but... Oh, I do miss Freddie.
Yeah, I know. But, Dotty, this man Masklin, no one knows where he went?
Well, seems not. Only Nurse Rogers did tell me one thing.
What did she tell you?
When she went to Mr. Masklin's room this morning, the door was locked.
Strangely enough, after that sad and eventful night, the Primrose Path became, in some elusive and quiet way, more interesting.
Mr. Masklin was an impossible patient, Mr. Rumpole. Quite frankly, we were glad to see the back of him.
No one saw him leave?
No one.
That young man, Gavin, wasn't he at the desk by the front door?
Gavin is studying for an important exam. He can't watch the door every minute of the night.
Did Masklin have a family?
Oh, someone he said was his sister came once. No one's been able to track her down either.
Do the police know he's gone missing?
We reported it naturally. If you're so interested, I can tell you there's no sign of him at his last known address.
My friend Dotty says his door was locked in the morning when she came on duty.
Your friend Nurse Albright says a lot of things we don't have to take too much notice of. Of course, the door wasn't locked at night. We locked it in the morning until the police came to see if there were any clues to where he'd gone. We didn't want the evidence disturbed. You know all about that, don't you, Mr. Rumpole?
I suppose I do. All in all, it must have been a terrible night for you. I was sorry to hear about Mr. Fairweather.
Oh, well, these things happen, Mr. Rumpole, at a place like this. They're very sad, but they happen all the time. We've got used to it, of course, and we deal with it as kindly as possible, whatever your friend Nurse Albright may say about the matter.
Dotty told me she was very fond of Mr. Fairweather.
Oh, yes. And did your friend also tell you that dear old Mr. Fairweather had said he'd left her money in his will?
She never said anything about that. Only that she was upset because he died so suddenly.
Yes, well, it's nothing for you to worry about, Mr. Rumpole, is it? And if you take my advice, you'll steer very clear of your friend's herbal remedies. Some of them may have unfortunate results. Oh, yeah. Does Nanky Poo want walkies? Oh, come on. Can't spend all day talking to you, Mr. Rumpole. Really, I can't. Come along, darling.
Sister Sheila recognised no superior being except for one called Nanky Poo, an evil-tempered, spoiled and domineering Pekingese dog, whom I had seen the sister kiss, fondle, feed with chocolate biscuits, and generally spoil in a way she would never treat a patient. Like many of the inhabitants of the Primrose Path, Nanky Poo suffered a degree of incontinence which littered the garden and added some significance to his name. Late one afternoon, as I woke from a light doze, I found Dotty sitting by my bed with a surprise present. Dotty, you're a genius. It was half a bottle of claret she'd managed to get opened in an off-licence and smuggled in under her mac.
Cheers.
Cheers. We shared a tooth-glassful of a wine in the same humble class as Chateau Thames Embankment, but nonetheless welcome to a palate starved of alcohol. Dotty was quieter, sadder somehow.
They don't want me to go to the funeral.
Who doesn't want you to? The family?
No, Sister Sheila. And Freddie's special doctor. Freddie wouldn't see anyone else.
The common run of patients, myself included, were attended to by one of the local GPs. However, the Primrose Path was visited almost daily by a tall, elegantly dressed man in a well-cut suit, who moved in a deafening smell of aftershave down the corridor, always escorted by Sister Sheila, and referred to by the staff in tones of considerable awe as Dr. Lucas.
I've never got on with that doctor. Do you know, they won't even tell me where the funeral's going to be. They said it was Freddie's special wish. He hated funerals.
None of us liked them, particularly our own.
So he didn't want anyone to be there. It was his last wish, they told me. He wanted to be cremated.
The primrose way to the everlasting bonfire.
You know what happened? Dr. Lucas and Sister Sheila were there with him when he died. They rang the undertaker, they said, and they had him taken away at once, during the night. As though Freddie was something to be ashamed of.
You miss him very much, don't you?
Oh, poor old thing. Do you know, sometimes he said he was in love with me.
She put her hand into the pocket of her uniform
Look at this.
And pulled out a photograph. A bald-headed, elderly man with a nose which looked as though it had at some distant time in his life been broken in hostility or sport. He was sitting up in bed, smiling, with his arm round Nurse Dotty.
Trainee Nurse Jones took that. We were all laughing.
Sister Sheila said something to me. Was Fairweather going to leave you money in his will?
Oh, he told everyone that. Not that I ever really expected anything, of course. But it just showed how well we got on. He said he didn't have much of a family left to provide for. He told me he had a business somewhere in the north of England, and he wasn't short of a bob or two. I'm going to find out about Freddie's funeral, and I'm going to it. I don't care what Sister Sheila has to say. I'm entitled to do that, aren't I?
I can assure you, if you want the best legal opinion, you're entitled to go to any funeral you choose. I'd even invite you to mine.
Oh, don't be silly. That's not going to happen. And we're not going to stay here much longer, are we? The Primrose Path's really just not our sort of place, is it?
Not our sort of place. Dottie's words, together with her account of the ease with which the awkward customer Masklin had escaped from the Primrose Path, fired my enthusiasm. I waited for a night when Dottie was not only off duty, but had gone to stay with her sister in Haywards Heath. I made sure that she couldn't be blamed by the Obergruppenführer for my having gone missing from the list of inmates. Right. My clothes were still hanging in a cupboard in my room, so I was able to change the pyjamas for my regulation garb of black jacket and waistcoat, a pair of striped trousers supported by braces, a white shirt with detachable collar, and, by this time, shamefully dusty and unpolished black shoes. I had kept charge of my wallet, which had 4 £10 notes and a travel pass in it, so I was soon prepared for the dash to freedom. The way you feel my pulse, the way you test my pee. I paused to scribble a note for Dottie, which contained only my own 4-line version of an old song. They can't take that away from me. I wasn't particularly proud of rhyming pulse with else, but time was pressing, and I had a journey to make. I signed the message, Love Rumpole, put the dressing gown back on over my clothes, and moved out stealthily towards the staircase. The gods who look after the elderly trying to escape the clutches of the medical profession were on my side. Gavin, the quiet and serious young student to whom a shaven head and an over-large brown jumper gave a curiously monkish appearance, was away from his desk, as he was on the night Michael Masklin walked free. I slid back bolts, undid chains, and passed out into the night, shedding the dressing gown in the darkness of the garden. Dressed as though for the Old Bailey, I presented myself at the railway station, where the last train to Victoria was, happily, half an hour late. My first call in London was to Equity Court. Our chambers were silent and empty. I went into my room, which seemed on first glance to be depressingly tidy. However, the eagle eyes of the tidier-up had missed a half-full packet of small cigars at the back of a drawer. I lit one, puffed out a perfect smoke ring, and then I noticed a glossy little folder, something which looked like the advertisement for a country hotel or a tour of the Lake District, except the cover bore the words Equity Court Chambers, with the truncated address bestofthebar, all one word, .com. Inside, on the first page, was a list of our chamber's members. My eye was immediately drawn to one entry, Horace Rumpole, B.A. Oxon, against which someone had written, with a felt-tipped pen, deceased. I immediately lifted the telephone and called my home in Froxbury Mansions. Hilda?
Rumpole, is that you?
Yes, it's me, Rumpole, and not Rumpole deceased either. It's Rumpole alive and kicking.
Isn't it way past bedtime in the Primrose Path?
I don't care what bedtime is in the Primrose Path. I'm not in the Primrose Path anymore. I've put the Primrose Path far behind me. I'm in Chambers.
You're in Chambers? Whatever are you doing in Chambers? Go back to the nursing home at once.
Certainly not. I'm coming home to Gloucester Road. I don't need nursing anymore. It would be untrue to say that there was, at first anyway, a hero's welcome for the returning Rumpole. There were no flowers, cheers, or celebratory bottles opened. There was the expected denunciation of the defendant Rumpole as
selfish, ungrateful, irresponsible, opinionated, willful, and, not to put too fine a point upon it, a pain in the neck to all who have to deal with you.
But behind these stiff sentences, I got the strange and unusual feeling that Hilda was fairly pleased to see me alive and kicking. She told me of the impending visit of the 2 QCs, and when Ballard let her know over the telephone that they planned a fitting tribute to Rumpole's life, she guessed what they were after. Now I appeared to be back in the land of the living. She was prepared to fall in with my master plan, and enable me to eavesdrop as the two leading pomposities of our chambers unfolded their plans to mark the end of Rumpole's life on earth. Accordingly, I was shut away in the kitchen when Ballard and Erskine Brown arrived. Hilda left the sitting-room door ajar, and I moved into the hall to enjoy the conversation.
Mrs. Rumpole, we're sure you would like to join us in offering up thanks for the gift of Rumpole's life.
A gift? Not a free gift, certainly. It had to be paid for by a certain amount of irritation.
That is strictly true, but one has to admit that Horace achieved a certain notoriety, notwithstanding the fact that he remained a member of the junior bar.
Albeit a rather elderly member of the junior bar.
It's true that he never took a silk gown or joined us in the front row. The Lord Chancellor never made him a QC.
His face didn't fit with the establishment.
All the same, some of the cases he did attracted attention. So we want to arrange a memorial service in the Temple Church.
You mean a memorial service for Rumpole?
That, Mrs. Rumpole, Hilda, if I may, is exactly what we mean. We're sure that you, of course, Hilda, and Rumpole's family and friends would wish to join us in this act of celebration.
You mean you're going to invite that terrible tribe of South London criminals?
I hardly think that the Timpsons would fit in with the congregation at the Temple Church.
I'm sure there will be many people who aren't members of the criminal fraternity and who'll want to give Rumpole a really good send-off.
Thank you for that kind thought, Ballard.
Rumpole!
It was at this point that I entered the room, carrying a bottle of Chateau Thames Embankment and 4 glasses. And now you're both here, perhaps we'll all drink to Rumpole Revived. Hamlet, happening to bump into his father's ghost on the battlements, couldn't have looked more surprised than my learned friends. I was sitting in my room in Chambers when our clerk Henry put through a phone call, and I heard, to my delight, the voice of Nurse Dotty.
I had a visit from the police. They wanted me to help them with their inquiries.
I felt a chill wind blowing. People who help the police with their inquiries often end up in serious trouble. Inquiries about what?
Poor old Freddie Fairweather's death. They suggest I call in at the station and bring my solicitor, and I haven't really got a solicitor.
Well, I'll get you one. Where are you? I'll ring you back. This was clearly a job for my old friend Bonnie Bernard, and I put him in touch with Dotty. A few days later, she called into my chambers to report the result of an extraordinary conversation which they had had with Detective Inspector Maundy and Detective Sergeant Thorndyke in a nick not too far from the Primrose Path home.
They were a decent enough couple of officers, but they soon made their suspicions clear to your Mr. Bernard and to me.
Suspicions of what?
Murder, Mr. Rumpole.
Dotty, you haven't done in Sister Sheila.
They're investigating the death of one of the patients, Mr. Frederick Fairweather. As if I'd do anything to hurt Freddie. We were great friends, you know that, just as you and I were, Mr. Rumpole.
And we still are, Dotty. But what are you supposed to have done to Fairweather?
Digitalis.
Foxglove?
It's used to stabilise the action of the heart. They asked me about the access I had to digitalis or digoxin. They seemed to think that I had a huge collection of pills and potions.
Well, you do have something of the sort, haven't you?
Oh, only harmless herbal remedies of my own, you know that. And of course I had access to digoxin, but I'd always entered every dose I had to give a patient, and I never treated Freddie with it at all.
So what are they suggesting?
That they had evidence I used a whole lot of digoxin without entering it or keeping a note. That I was seen coming out of Freddie Fairweather's room an hour before he died, and that I had also boasted I was going to benefit from Mr. Fairweather's will. It's all completely ridiculous. I went to bed early that night and never left my room until I went on duty next day. I didn't care a scrap about Freddie's will. I only wanted him to get better. That was all I wanted. Nothing would have made me harm him, nothing in the world.
Now, that Dr. Lucas, was it? He must have entered the cause of death.
Well, he said the cause of death was a heart attack, that Mr. Fairweather had had heart problems. But Dr. Lucas told the inspector that the attack might also have been brought about by an overdose of digoxin.
Dotty, you told me you were going to Freddie's cremation. Did you go?
Oh, it was terrible, Mr. Rumpole. Just terrible. There was no one there, absolutely no one at all. Sister Sheila had said Freddie didn't want anyone to see him go, but I couldn't believe that. There was no one to say anything in the chapel, not a word, not a prayer. And there was just me to watch the coffin slide away behind the curtains. Apart from me, he went quite alone.
Is there anything else you want to tell me?
Only that I'm angry. So angry.
Angry because you know who's been talking to the police?
Of course.
You think it's Sister Sheila?
Who else could it be? They told us, Mr. Rumpole, that they'd be making further inquiries. Of course, we don't know what they'll find out.
Perhaps they'll find out why Sister Sheila went to them with a story like that. It was while I was turning the plight of Dotty Albright over in my mind that my room was invaded by a pungent but not unpleasant perfume. A tall woman in a black trouser suit with blonde hair came with it.
Got a minute?
Hmm?
It's about time we had a word. I'm sorry, I haven't had a window before.
A window? Was the poor young woman shut in some airless oubliette in the chambers cellarage? But by now she had made herself comfortable in my client's chair.
I'm Lucy Gribble. Lucy with an I. I'm your new Director of Marketing and Administration.
I never had an old Director of Marketing, so I don't see why I should need a new one.
I'm here, Horace, to look after your image.
Oh, I know what that means. I've heard it all before. It means you think I should get a new hat.
Oh, not at all. The hat's perfect. And the striped pants, and the cigar ash down the waistcoat. They all suit your image perfectly. Don't change a thing.
I'm told that you were behind the idea of a church service to celebrate my death.
To celebrate your life, Horace. That's what we were going to do. Of course, that's on hold. For the time being.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it.
Now, I understand you're going through a bit of a sticky patch, practice-wise.
Sticky?
Bit of a lull. A serious shortfall in briefs.
Not at all. As a matter of fact, I've just been instructed in a rather sensational murder case.
You're not kidding. Who got murdered?
Well, my client's a nurse. It suggested she murdered a patient called Freddie Fairweather in the Primrose Path home, a place from which I was extremely glad to escape.
Not Freddie Fairweather of Primrose.
The Primrose Path.
Well, I don't know anything about a Primrose Path. The Freddie Fairweather I worked for was Primrose Personal Pensions.
Oh.
He was an IFA.
What?
Independent financial advisor. Invested anyone's money in what he called a gilt-edged pension scheme. On the whole, about as gilt-edged as a bouncing cheque. Which is why we parted company. Do you say he's dead?
I'm afraid so. And without a memorial service. If he's the same Freddie Fairweather, of course.
Short, square shoulders, no hair, and a broken nose. Oh, he could turn on the charm, Freddie could. Had a bit of a chip on his shoulder as he'd left school at 15 and never been to university. Well, of course, if he's been murdered, you'd never have met him, would you, Horace?
I might have done, strangely enough. You say you worked for him. Where exactly?
Do you know Leeds at all?
I'm afraid I have only a sketchy knowledge of Leeds.
That's where I started in marketing. I was marketing for Freddie Fairweather. Oh, I won't say they were the best days of my life. I left because I didn't like the way the place was run. And I couldn't stand the company doctor. He was a quack who was meant to examine the pensioners. Oh, objectionable is not the word.
His name wasn't Lucas, was it?
Yeah, Sidney Lucas. That was him. Oh, but as for Freddie, I mean, he might have cut a few business corners, but I wouldn't have wanted to see him murdered.
I looked at her then. Her black-trousered legs crossed, shiny high-heeled boots pointed. An alien being in the dusty world of Equity Court. I lit a small cigar, and, rather to my surprise, she made no protest. I blew out smoke. I'd be very much obliged if you'd tell me everything you know about the late Freddie Fairweather.
All right, then. But would you mind passing me one of those whiffs?
Oh, with pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
And we sat smoking and talking together. And what the new Director of Marketing told me was of considerable interest.
Right. Oof, wait till you hear this, Horace.
It was time to call in old favours. I found myself in Pomeroy's wine bar, waiting for a lugubrious figure who wore, however pleasant the weather, an elderly mackintosh and the expression of a man with a cold who forever feels a drip forming at the end of his nose.
Hello, Mr. Rumpole.
This was, of course, the invaluable sleuth Ferdinand Ian Gilmore, known throughout the legal profession as Fig Newton, who, since adultery no longer had any legal significance, had taken to crime. In this field, his investigations were often more thorough and far more useful than those carried out by the police.
I heard you passed over.
And I've come back to haunt you, Fig, and also to remind you of the interesting and profitable work I've put your way over many years.
Interesting, Mr. Rumpole, yes. Rather less profitable. I wouldn't say any of them paid above the average. What do you have in mind?
I invested in a bottle of Chateau Thames Embankment. I'm afraid it was of an indifferent year, and not long enough in bottle. I sat Fig down at a quiet table in the corner of the bar. Then I told him all I knew about Freddie Fairweather and the Primrose Path, which had led, in his case so suddenly, to the everlasting bonfire. Then I gave him the list I'd made of the required information.
Are you suggesting, Mr. Rumpole, that I do all this as some sort of favour?
Fig looked at it doubtfully, like a man invited to swallow peculiarly nasty medicine. We'll try and meet your reasonable expenses. I can't promise you much more at the moment.
Time is money, Mr. Rumpole. If you can give me one good reason...
All right, Fig, I'll give you a good reason. I'm just back from a near-death experience. Business is slow, not to say boring. An excellent, charming, and utterly innocent woman has been accused of murder. It may all come to nothing, in a way I hope so. But meanwhile the case is shrouded in mystery, and I need your help. And if I can't solve it, I might as well turn up my toes and hang up my wig.
Don't do that, Mr. Rumpole. When do we start?
I also had more work for Bonnie Bernard, to pursue inquiries at Somerset House, and also now in the Leeds area. And I got him to agree to open informal discussions with Detective Inspector Maundy of the Sussex Police. So, south and north, my messengers set forth in search of information, and I had nothing much to do but sit in my room awaiting results. I was busily engaged in lighting a small cigar, while wrestling with the Times crossword puzzle, when my phone rang. Hello? It was Dotty.
Hello, Mr. Rumpole.
Oh, Dotty. Have you been summoned to another interview with the forces of law and order?
No, but I've had a call from the Primrose Path.
From Sister Sheila?
No, from Gavin. You remember Gavin, the quiet boy, university student? He used to be on the hall desk at nights, always had his head in a book.
Yeah, or else he wasn't there much. He wasn't on guard to prevent the escape of Michael Masklin, or come to that mine.
We got on rather well. He seemed a lonely sort of boy. We used to make coffee and talk when I was on nights and nothing much was happening. We argued about God and sex and fidelity and M&M, all those things that students talk about. It made me feel quite young again. I think he liked me.
Well, I'm not at all surprised. Did you talk about the night they took away Freddie Fairweather?
No. He was away on some sort of course when that happened. No, this call was about his degree. He's due to get it soon from the University of Dorking. He asked me to go and watch. I was rather flattered.
What's he qualified in? Golf course management? Text messaging? Spiritual furniture arrangement? Aren't they the sort of things you get degrees in nowadays?
Nothing like that. Theology.
I began to ponder about young Gavin, and his very part-time presence on duty at the Primrose Path, while apparently doing his best to justify the ways of God to man in Dorking. Dotty, I think you should go to the degree ceremony. Yes, definitely. I might even come with you. We'll get a good seat and keep our eyes open. But before that, I had to go back along the Primrose Path. Sister Sheila was awaiting me in her office.
I suppose you've come to apologise for the way you left us, Mr. Rumpole, slinking away like a thief in the night. It merely goes to show that you are still seriously unwell. And by the way, there is a bill for extras, which you left unpaid.
I haven't come here to apologise. I've come here to discuss one of your patients, Frederick Fairweather.
Mr. Fairweather sadly died, Mr. Rumpole, as I believe you know. He had trouble with his heart, as you have. Now, if there's nothing else you want to say to me...
There are a few little things I'd like to ask about Mr. Fairweather. He had a company in Leeds, selling private pensions, hadn't he?
Well, that was his business, was it? And you know more than I do.
Oh, I doubt that. And his business was called Primrose Pensions, wasn't it? And this is the Primrose Path Home.
Well, if that's so, it is a pure coincidence.
Really? There are a lot of coincidences, aren't there, about that eventful night? But let's stick to his business for a moment. Didn't he buy this home as an investment about 10 years ago? That was when you'd started to run it, and you got to know him rather well. Isn't that the truth of the matter?
I really don't see why I should sit here answering questions about the home's private arrangements. That is absolutely no business of yours, Mr. Rumpole.
I'm afraid it is my business, Mrs. Fairweather.
What did you call me?
By your name. You married Freddie last year, didn't you? In a Leeds register office. He was the divorced husband of Barbara Elizabeth Threadwell, by whom he had one son, a quiet boy named Gavin, who got into university to read theology and is occasionally on duty at the desk in the hallway. I suppose you got Freddie to marry you as part of the deal.
Deal? What sort of a deal are you suggesting?
Primrose Pensions is in serious trouble, isn't it? The pensions just aren't there anymore. The poor devils who subscribe to Primrose have no comfortable income to look forward to. God knows what will happen to them. They'll be sleeping in doorways and dying on the national health, because the truth of the matter is Freddie trousered their money. Then he had nowhere to hide, except a quiet nursing home run by his wife, where he could be treated by his company doctor, who would assure the world and the fraud squad that Freddie was far too ill to come to court.
Mr. Rumpole, are you telling me you knew Mr. Fairweather well?
Since I left here, I've got to know him very well indeed.
You must be seriously ill, Mr. Rumpole. Mr. Fairweather has, as you well know, been dead for some time.
Are you sure?
Sure? Of course I'm sure.
It would have been what he wanted.
You think he wanted to die? People who come here don't want to die, Mr. Rumpole.
And not everyone has the fraud squad and the pension watchdog breathing down their necks. Not everyone has filched thousands of pounds of pensioners' money. The time was coming when Freddie's shelter in the Primrose Path might not be sufficient. There was only one place left for him to hide. Death.
Are you suggesting my patient committed suicide?
Oh, of course not. Freddie wouldn't give up as easily as that. His way out, and I think you know this as well as I do, was a death which was as much a fake as his pensions.
That is a most outrageous suggestion. My lawyers will make sure you pay for it and never repeat it.
Oh, I think your lawyers will have more important business on their hands. I'm sure Freddie's death was discussed, but no one could have planned the great opportunity of that night. It was more by luck, wasn't it, than good management?
Mr. Rumpole, Mr. Fairweather died of heart failure, confirmed by Dr. Lucas. His body was cremated, an event which was witnessed by your friend, Nurse Albright, who says he promised her something in his will.
Let me first deal with that. Dr. Lucas had spent years as the official medical advisor to a fraudulent pension company. Like you, I'm sure he expected to share in the spoils. You did your best to keep the date and place of Freddie's funeral a secret, but Dottie made her own inquiries. It's true she saw a coffin slide into the eternal bonfire. But whose coffin was it, exactly?
Freddie's, of course. Who else could it have been?
A man called Masklin? A transfer from a crowded hospital? A man no one knew much about, no apparent friends, no traceable relatives? He left the hospital that night. Was it, perhaps, the night he happened to die? I'm not saying you and Lucas killed him. I don't think you did. I just think his death was a stroke of luck. It meant that one of you could tell the undertaker that the dead man's name was Frederick Fairweather. And now, do you want to know why I've gone to the trouble of finding all this out? Because you got into a panic when you thought Dottie was asking too many questions and finding out too much about that dubious event in the crematorium. So you decided to discredit Dottie by making her a murder suspect. So you spun the police some ridiculous story about too much digoxin, implying that she would kill Freddie because he'd promised to remember her in his will. But there wasn't any will, any more than there was any fatal heart attack. When you next see Freddie, give him my regards and ask him if he's enjoying his death. I got up to go then, and the room, which had seemed so still, was full of movement. Lanky Pooh jumped out of his basket and started to bark, a high-pitched, irritable yelp, like a particularly difficult patient complaining hysterically. At the same time, the door opened, and Dr. Sidney Lucas stood in my way. He was looking at me in what I took to be a distinctly unfriendly fashion.
Dr. Lucas, this man is mad. He's seriously insane. He's been talking nonsense to me about poor Freddie.
Dr. Lucas filled the doorway, considerably younger, taller, and a great deal stronger than I am. Excuse me. Detective Inspector Maundy of the local force is waiting for me outside. He'll be very worried if I don't emerge. I did warn him that I might have some difficulty leaving. Whatever they had done to help a crooked businessman disappear from the face of the earth, however outrageous and reckless that plan had been, and however dishonest the doctor's conduct, the mention of the local constabulary made him step aside. I walked away from the Primrose Path for the last time, and towards the forces of law and order. I was prepared to make a statement. The University of Dorking is not an old foundation. The Assembly Hall is a modern glass and concrete building, in front of which stands a large piece of abstract statuary built, as far as I could see, of flattened and twisted girders and bits and pieces of motionless machinery. But inside the amphitheatre, the Vice-Chancellor, the professors and the lecturers were decked out in pink and scarlet gowns with slung-back medieval hoods. I sat with Dotty among the proud parents, behind the rows of students. Gavin, in his clean white shirt and hardly worn suit, looked younger than ever, hardly more than a schoolboy. As he waited his turn in the queue, his eyes had searched the audience. When he saw Dotty, he gave her a small, grateful wave and a smile. Now he stepped forward to get his scroll.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Look now, Dotty, up there. We turned and looked up to the entrance of the Assembly Hall. High above us, at the top of the raked seats, was a doorway. Freddie Fairweather had just moved to where he could see his son, far below him, get his degree. He stood there, a small, broad-shouldered, square figure, with a broken nose. It was a moment of pride he had not been able to resist. As a great chancer, why shouldn't he have taken this risk to see Gavin get what he had never had? A university degree. He turned away, meaning to disappear again into the world of the dead. But he was stopped by Fig Newton and Detective Sergeant Thorndyke, who had been waiting for him, at my suggestion. So, the case of the Primrose Path never got me a brief. Neither Sister Sheila nor Dr. Sidney Lucas, when arraigned for their various offences, thought of employing Rumpole to defend them. Freddie Fairweather ended up in an open prison. Gavin has taken holy orders and returned to Leeds. I still meet Dotty from time to time, for tea in the Waldorf Hotel, where we sing, quietly but with pleasure, the old standards together. The way you sip your tea.
The memory of all that.
No, they can't take that away from me. I must say that I won't hear a word of criticism of Miss Lucy Gribble. I owe her a debt of gratitude. She graciously allowed me to come back to the land of the living, and she helped me solve the mystery of the Primrose Path nursing home. No, they can't take that away from me. No, they can't take that away from me.
In Rumpole and the Primrose Path by John Mortimer, Horace Rumpole was played by Timothy West, his wife Hilda, Prunella Scales, Samuel Ballard, Michael Cochrane, Claude Erskine Brown, Nigel Anthony, and Lucy Gribble, Sophie Thompson. Nurse Dotty Albright was played by Joanna David, Sister Sheila Bradwell, Carol Boyd, and Fig Newton by David Shaw Parker. Rumpole and the Primrose Path was directed by Marilyn Imrie.